The mouse wriggles desperately under the cat's paw as the long, curved feline claws dig into its furry skin. It squeaks with the primal terror of a creature that knows it's about to be devoured alive. No matter how hard it tries, it can't escape. It's in the clutches of its perfect predator. As the mouse fights for its life, the cat licks its fangs and descends towards its frightened prey. But before it can sink its fangs into the mouse's body, the cat opens its mouth and says, "Sorry about this, but I don't have a choice," in perfect English. It started with a man named Maurice, whose girlfriend was currently in the process of dumping him. The two of them sat in a diner over cups of coffee and mediocre eggs as she tried her best to let him down gently. But Maurice, his eyes glistening with tears, didn't want to get out that easy. He asked his former girlfriend, Laura, in case you were interested, why she didn't want to be with him anymore. For reasons even she didn't understand, Laura decided that on that fateful day, she would be honest with the man she was dumping. She told him that he is a nice guy, he's just kind of boring. Specifically, he just isn't cultured. He only listens to top 40 music, doesn't watch any movies that don't have superheroes in them. She can't even remember the most recent time she saw him reading a book, and never once in their 3-year relationship has she ever seen him take an interest in art. Laura wishes Maurice a nice life and leaves the diner. The next couple of weeks are hell for poor Maurice. He doesn't know what to do with himself in the single life. He goes to work, but that's about it. The rest of the time, he cries. He sleeps, he eats whole buckets of Ben & Jerry's, and he rewatches the same set of movies that Laura left him for watching in the first place. He's stuck in a rut, an endless loop, and as he lays on his couch in the dead of night while Avengers Infinity War plays out on his screen for the 21st time, he notices how blank his walls are, bereft of even a single poster, photo, or painting. That's when it hits him. "You call me uncultured? I'll show you, Laura. I can be plenty cultured when I want to be." That same night, he Googled art dealerships in his area and found something interesting. Archibald's Art and Antiquities, only a 20-minute walk from his apartment. The place was apparently accredited, with sponsorships from something called MC&D, and also claiming to feature some acclaimed pieces of art from the fine folks of the AWCY Collective. All of this went over Maurice's not particularly cultured head, but he decided he'd definitely be visiting the place first thing in the morning. When he arrives, after shaving and washing his hair for the first time in over 2 weeks, he's feeling optimistic about his prospects. It is a classy-looking store, the exact kind of thing he was expecting when he read about the place online. There's even a hand-painted open sign in the front window. The store owner, Archibald presumably, greets Maurice in the doorway. He's an old man with thick black glasses and a white walking cane. Is he blind? Maurice is confused by that. A blind art dealer feels kind of like a comedian who can't speak, but the dealer is polite and tells Maurice to look around to his heart's content. Once again, Maurice feels a little out of his depth. On some level, he knows Laura was right. He doesn't know the first thing about art. None of it was connecting. His eyes passed over paintings, sculptures, and artistic photos with no effect. He was worried for a while that perhaps he was truly helpless, until his eyes met with a truly glorious sight. A painting that spoke to him on the very deepest levels of his soul. It doesn't even have a title, but the second he sees it, he just knows it has to be his. It's a painting of a fat cat lying against a pile of pillows without a care in the world. It's everything that Maurice wants to be in his life. Relaxed, unbothered, carefree, happy. Before he even knows it, he's reaching for his wallet. A short transaction with Archibald later, and Maurice returned home with his new prized possession. A painting that represented a turning point in his life in more ways than he could have ever understood. With a hammer and some nails, he mounted the precious painting up on his wall so that he could look at it for inspiration every single day. It's the start of a new chapter. Maybe everything would be better now. Little did Maurice know, the transformation had already started. 1 hour after initial viewing. It's like a switch in Maurice's brain had been flipped. He was suddenly pulled out of his post-breakup depressive slump rejuvenated, reborn. With the painting up on his wall, he started to look at the apartment differently. This place was a dump. Where was the life? Where was the effort? He needed to make the rest of the apartment worth the grandeur of the painting. He started cleaning up and looking at articles on feng shui. He carefully rearranged the place until it looked perfect, like the kind of place a woman would be proud to go back to. Speaking of which, he signed up for some old dating profiles, taking a nicer, happier selfie to represent himself. Somehow, with the painting in his possession, anything seemed possible. The possibilities were endless. For the first time in a long time, thoughts of Laura didn't even cross his mind. He's thinking about the future rather than the past, about all the wonderful things that he can do and experience now that he's single. He's on his way to being cultured. One day after initial viewing, Maurice is picking up some new tastes. While spending hours browsing online retailers like Etsy and Redbubble, he finds himself drawn to furniture and ornaments around one particular subject: cats. It doesn't even really strike him as that strange at first. After all, so many of the articles he read about interior decoration advised having a cohesive theme for your living space, like a nice rug. It just really ties the room together. He buys a rug shaped like a cat. He buys some cat cushions and throw pillows, a picture frame with a cat on it, cat charms, cat statues, cat statuettes, cat everything. The more he puts into his home, the more it feels like it's meant to be. And really, why stop at just decoration? He starts buying t-shirts with cats on them and sweaters with kawaii cat faces lovingly embroidered into the fabric. He even buys a woolly hat with cat ears on top for when the winter months roll around. As the quantity of cat-based merchandise in his home begins to outweigh everything else, another thought wanders into his mind. There's not a no pets clause in his lease agreement. Why doesn't he just cut to the chase and get himself an actual pet cat? With a sense of joy and excitement he hasn't felt in a long time, he starts to Google local rescues where he might be able to adopt a new furry little friend. 1 week after initial viewing, Maurice has already made some of his dreams into a reality. He's got a cat, Felix, who wanders around his home. He's thinking about getting another as he pours some kibble into Felix's bowl, or maybe 2 others. A whole family of cuddly kitties to keep him company. Why would he even need a girlfriend? He starts to think about how everyone would be happier if they had a cat or 2 in their life. This is the thought that inspires his new information campaign. He starts with the people at work, telling anyone who will listen to him about how getting a cat has changed his life. When he does go on occasional dates, his favorite topic of conversation is, of course, his feline friends. He can't wait to ask his potential partners whether they're cat people or dog people, and if they're undecided, he eagerly takes the opportunity to convert them. It didn't take long for his almost holy mission to go further. He wants to make people's lives better, and his life started getting better when he first bought that wonderful painting. He tries his best to convince people to come back to his apartment just so they can take a look at the painting. Most people politely decline the offer. 3 weeks after initial viewing, the changes to Maurice's behavior became a little more drastic. He's become so obsessed with the feline lifestyle that his own behavior begins to take on a kind of cat-like dimension. He doesn't feel the need to take a shower or bathe anymore. Why would he need to, when he can just lick himself clean? The same goes for eating. Why sit at a table with a plate and a knife and fork? Instead, he eats directly off the ground with his hands and mouth. He drinks milk out of a saucer, hungrily lapping it up. Some days, he doesn't even feel like walking bipedally. He'll walk on his hands and feet with his rear sticking up in the air. Somehow, it feels more comfortable than walking normally. But the transformations are only just beginning. 2 months after initial viewing, Maurice has started to notice that his stubble is growing out faster than usual. Sometimes he needs to shave twice a day, if he wants to stay neat. But what began with the stubble would soon grow quickly out of proportion. His eyebrows became wild and bushy. His hair started to become almost a mane, growing out in thick mutton chops and creeping down his neck towards his back. His arm and leg hair, the hair on his chest and his back. At a certain point, shaving felt futile. He just let it grow out. Soon enough, it didn't look like hair. It looked more like, well, fur. Just like the soft, silky fur on his beloved Felix. Maurice doesn't mind it. In fact, he's starting to love it. With a cat in a room full of cat memorabilia, all overseen by his beautiful, perfect cat painting, Maurice fits right in here. 4 months after initial viewing, Maurice woke up one morning to find something strange about himself. Even stranger than everything else, he's gotten smaller. No, it's not as though he's lost weight. He's physically gotten smaller. Had Maurice been the kind of guy who likes to habitually visit the doctor, they would have told him that his skeletal structure had somehow contracted, along with his skin and musculature. Nothing is out of proportion. It's almost like he's gradually been hit with a kind of science fiction shrink ray. Maurice doesn't pay much mind to it, of course. He only noticed that he'd gotten shorter when he went to lovingly gaze at his painting, and noticed that he was looking at it from a slightly different angle than usual. But that's fine. Much like Maurice himself now, it's no biggie. If anything, it's a real treat to see his prized possession from a slightly different perspective. While Maurice didn't know it, at this point, he was only 2 months away from fully completing the process he'd started undergoing just 4 months earlier. 5 months after initial viewing, the most obvious of the changes started occurring at this point. For a few months now, people at the office had been politely ignoring the peculiar changes to Maurice's size and skin, and his tendency to treat lunch break very differently to his colleagues. But the alterations that began at month 5 were impossible to ignore. First, the ears. They disappeared against the sides of Maurice's head. Instead, 2 other ears, pointy and furry, popped out of the top of his skull, half hidden amongst his hair. Then came the eyes. His sclera disappeared, and his pupils lengthened and narrowed into black, feline slits. And, of course, most inconvenient to Maurice's daily life, the disappearances of his thumbs and fingers. They shortened down to furry nubs until his hands weren't hands at all. They were more like paws. The transformation is almost complete. 6 months after initial viewing. By now, the transformation is complete. Getting into art has changed Maurice's life forever. He has now quite literally become a cat. He paws through his apartment with his best friend, Felix, eating kibble to his heart's content. The one difference being that Maurice, despite his new form, retains all of his personality and mind. He can even talk, if you're the kind of person who enjoys talking to cats. Because Maurice had the foresight to leave a window open before the transformation fully took hold, he and Felix could come and go as they pleased. When the kibble ran out, they started running through the alleys together, foraging for scraps and hunting down mice and birds for sustenance. Maurice was reported missing a month ago, and there have been no leads in the case. Posters went up, searches were performed, but nothing was ever found. A few months after that, he'd been declared legally dead, to the human world at least. Laura never thought about him again after the news reports stopped, and eventually his apartment was cleared out and resold. He and Felix would spend the rest of their days eking out a strange little existence together on the streets, just taking it day by day. And despite it all, Maurice is happy. In case you somehow hadn't gathered from all that, SCP-3270 is an anomalous painting of a cat lounging against a pillow. Isn't he adorable? You may be inclined to agree, but if you encounter the painting in person, that agreement may come at a heavy cost. While seeing secondary reproductions of the painting has no anomalous effect, seeing the real thing in person will cause horrific changes to the human body. Little by little, anyone who observes the painting directly has a considerable chance of turning into a cat. Designated SCP-3270-1. These are no ordinary cats, of course. They're cats with human intelligence, human lifespans, and even the ability to speak. Despite cat physiology not being compatible with human speech, the painting itself is kept in Site-64, and any humans turned into cats by its anomalous powers are kept in Site-88, where they're very well taken care of. The idea of being turned into a cat and forever forsaking your humanity might horrify you, but you shouldn't worry about it too much. After all, cats have it pretty well. You've just had a night of your life in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. You spend hours shooting craps, dancing in clubs, and eating more than your fill at the famous all-you-can-eat buffets. You're staggering back to your hotel room, high on life in the early hours of the morning when you notice something strange. A long dark tunnel just off the side of the strip You didn't notice it on the way in, perhaps because you were distracted by all the glitz, glamour, and hypnotic casino lights. You see the tunnel, and your overstimulated mind feels drawn to it. You stumble in and start walking. During your walk, you can feel your bones cracking. They don't shatter like you've just been hit by a train. They shift. You feel the entire shape of you bending into something different, but it doesn't stop with your skeleton. Your organs start to feel strange, and then your skin. In the complete darkness of the tunnel, you have no idea what's going on, so you just keep walking. Eventually, you find your way into a lush green forest. It's beautiful, but it feels like it should be a million miles away from the arid desert of Nevada. You were only in the tunnel for a few minutes. What gives?
Hello?
You call out.
Is anybody there?
No answer. You explore further into this empty forest. Its trees are far as the eye can see, but no animals. That's when you see something that catches your eye. A puddle of crystal clear water. But it's not the puddle itself that draws your attention. It's what reflects back at you when you stare into it. At first, you can hardly believe it, but as you move your mouth in shock and the reflection moves its mouth too, it's suddenly all too real. You've been turned into a fox, an orange, bushy-tailed fox. You scream and bolt all the way back to the tunnel that led you here. You sprint through and feel your entire body changing once more. When you finally hit the wall of dry Vegas heat on the other side, you're human again. You breathe a sigh of relief and stumble back to your hotel room. The next day, you only vaguely remember what happened, and because you're not crazy, you assume it was just all a wild dream. What you just encountered is a Euclid-class SCP known as SCP-2746, a seemingly innocent tunnel near the Vegas Strip, which holds a portal to a fantastical world designated by the Foundation as SCP-2746-1. By the time the Foundation discovered and secured the SCP-2746 tunnel and began sending their field agents and researchers on fact-finding expeditions inside, the place was already a ghost town, a forested landmass approximately 111 kilometers in diameter, with no notable signs of life. The Foundation discovered that this place had a strange effect on people and animals who came in from our world. Humans who entered assumed the form of a random animal, but retained their intelligence and vocal cords, creating talking animals. Animals brought into 2746-1 retained their animalistic intelligence, but grew human-like vocal cords, allowing them to repeat simple phrases. Before the mass exodus or extinction event that left 2746-1 barren, the Foundation figured out that this place was populated by a whole civilization of intelligent animals, like something out of a fairy tale. These animals, through a mix of brains and magic, were able to leave written records and create impressive architecture, like homes and places of worship. Foundation researchers became fascinated with how exactly this society operated and what could have led to its sudden downfall. Thanks to a mix of advanced archaeology and records left behind by the creatures, this is what the Foundation determined. The society these talking, intelligent animals lived in was a kind of religious oligarchy, meaning power was consolidated by the few in the top social class. Society was divided into three segments: crafters, scholars, and honorables, with the crafters being the most powerful members of society and honorables being the least powerful. The state-sponsored churches acted in worship of a being simply called the Maker, who fills a similar role to the Abrahamic God. The crafters, whose number totaled 13, were believed to be immortal and were responsible for building the majority of the culture and architecture found in 2746-1. The scholars acted as their wise assistants, and the honorables were a mixed class of artists, carpenters, and artisans. It seemed that this culture had a pretty good thing going. No system of currency was ever invented, and the economy operated on a barter system. The Foundation believes that initially, the citizens of this world didn't need to eat to survive, and so only needed to barter for material goods. Though it's worth noting that the conditions of immortality only apply to natives of this region. People born on Earth but assuming animal forms while entering 2746-1 still need nutrition to survive. However, a great tragedy soon caused a fundamental shift in the balance of life and society within 2746-1. the Maker decided it wanted to test or punish its subjects with two major changes. First, humans would be forbidden from entering the domain. And second, the Maker now made the consumption of food necessary for continued survival and sanity. Nothing was ever the same. Because nobody had needed to eat prior to this, food stores had never been made, and the inhabitants had no agricultural knowledge that would allow them to easily mass-produce more. As a result, while the crafters and scholars were able to feed on fruits from luxurious private gardens, the honorables were forced to resort to eating each other or other inhabitants of 2746-1. This began a bloody rift that split society from the top down. One half, led by the powerful crafters Sari and Siward, wanted to preserve society as it was and continue to worship the Maker. Sari took the form of a Flemish giant rabbit, and Siward appeared as a house cat. The opposition, led by former crafters Frederick and Agathos, with the reluctant help of a scholar named Clovis, wanted to get revenge on the Maker for all he'd done and kill him, completely altering society. Don't be fooled by their appearances, though. Many of the inhabitants of 2746-1 were fiercely intelligent sorcerers, and the apocalyptic civil war they sparked came to be known to the Foundation as Event Nachash. Like many wars, there would be no real winners here, only survivors, and even then, not for long. It was a bloody and horrific war. All attempts at finding a diplomatic solution failed. Frederick and Agathos would not stop until they had the Maker's blood on their paws. In the end, though, they were defeated, and for their traitorous crimes, they were to be punished by Sari and Siward in horrific ways to make examples of them. Since neither could die, they were given fates worse than death instead. Frederick was up first. Before the war, he'd been a leader prized for his courage and ingenuity. He'd created something known as the Great Fire, which provided the kingdom with light. For his so-called atrocities against the Maker, he was given the punishment of permanent crucifixion and relocation to a place known as the Underplane. His snout was cut off his face, and he was set permanently ablaze in a manner that would leave him forever suffering and would make him appear to look like a monster to all. Next went Agathos. She was Frederick's sister and was seen as the mastermind of many of their schemes. She would be forever encased in white clay and bled through her eyes until the sin drains from her. She's now a living crying statue, existing in a state of permanent imprisonment for her part in the crimes against the Maker. Clovis, because her involvement in the coup was unwilling, was given a more minor punishment. One of her eyes was removed, and she was permanently placed in a broken human body, effectively banishing her from her home in 2746-1 forever. Though they may have won, things didn't end much better for Sari and Siward. The Civil War had fractured their world, and in the aftermath, the survivors chose to leave in hopes of finding a better life elsewhere. Sari and Siward, though, felt partially responsible for everything that had happened, and so they decided to remain in their dying world. Before they themselves died, or perhaps moved on to different forms, leaving their animal bodies behind, they left a final note. It was from this note that the Foundation learned much of the story of SCP-2746. This may seem like a pretty open and shut case, another magical realm destroyed by tragedy and civil war, much like the land of fantasy in SCP-1762. But what's really bizarre here is that this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the stories of some of these key figures in the event Nachash. First, what became of the two rebels, Agathos and Frederick? Today, they're two parts of the feared and deadly SCP-1913. Frederick, now going by Freddy, is a nightmarish faceless fire demon in the form of a dog, slavishly devoted to the protection of his sister, Agathos, now known as Agatha, still trapped in white clay, her leaking blood now deadly to the touch. Clovis is still believed to be in league with Agathos and Frederick, and may now be related to the sinister SCP-1903, a one-eyed rabbit-like human. But strangest of all is the possible truth behind Sari and Siward, the two devotees to the Maker who remained in 2746-1 until their very last breath. In all likelihood, these two were once agents of the SCP Foundation's infamous Las Vegas branch. They took on these more animalistic forms after their deaths. Sari may have once been Agent Sarah Crowley, a Japanese-American woman who died in the line of duty in 1960. Seward was once Dr. Stuart Hayward, Crowley's partner, his new name acting as a kind of fusion of the first and last name he had in life. This is only the beginning of the animal-themed weirdness occurring around Site 45, the Foundation's Vegas branch. But this series of anomalies, collected under the term Pitch Haven, will have to wait for another video. After all, you know what they say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Roll up, step right this way, ladies and gentlemen. On the other side of these canvas doors, you're about to witness something so monstrous, so hideous, so repulsive, that it will turn your stomachs and fill you with amazement. The creature you'll find in this tent has been known to elicit all manner of responses from well-to-do folks like yourselves. You may want to laugh at it, you may want to strike it down, you may even want to throw rotten fruit at it. And believe you me, we are prepared for that. You will find all manner of rotten tomatoes, eggs, and other festering foods that are begging to be pelted for the low price of 5 cents per handful. If you follow me through these doors and gather around this cage quietly, perhaps you will see it. Wait for your eyes to adjust to the dark and hold your revulsion until you cannot bear it anymore. Only then will we get to look at the papery gray skin sagging loose over a swollen gut. Marvel at its tree-trunk legs, barely strong enough to support its own weight, its deformed trunk that hangs limp off the front of its face, and its ridiculous ears that flap nervously when it's afraid. Don't be afraid of the tusks sticking out from its face or its cries of pain and anguish. Instead, hold your tongues and wait. For if you're patient enough, and perhaps with a slight beating, it may even play us a song with the valves on its trunk. Then, and only then, you're permitted to pelt the Elephant Man with whatever you see fit, as you bask in the glory of Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting.
Reese Freeman didn't have much of a choice but to join the circus at the age of 14. The cast-out son of a freed slave in New Orleans, he spent much of his early life wandering the streets, trying not to get into any trouble. In the late 1800s, very few places were interested in hiring a young black man, unless, of course, they were looking to turn him back to the life that his father had fought so hard to escape. That's why when Reese was out fishing one afternoon and saw a big red tent going up on the outskirts of town, he couldn't help but wander over. Much to his surprise, a group of black men were the ones raising the marquee. They didn't look like slaves either. Reese had never heard of a circus. The closest he'd ever come to seeing was a traveling entertainment cart that would sometimes pop up around town with a dancing bear in a cage, or a glass ball and a pack of tarot cards. The brightly colored tents that went up one after another were enough to draw a crowd. Even the most well-respected in New Orleans came out for a look. Standing ankle-deep in the river, Reese peered over at the man who came out to address the throng. Dressed in a long tailcoat with a tall top hat, the man stood on a box of fruit and waved a cane dramatically in the air.
Good folks of New Orleans! What you're about to witness tonight has never before been seen this side of the Mississippi. Wonders and amazement galore, spectacle and intrigue, mystery and mayhem, and just a touch of the impossible. I go by the name of Herman Fuller, the most talented and notorious circus master in the entire United States. The dazzling array of shows that I've brought before you is not for the faint of heart or the weak of constitution. Your stomachs will be turned and your minds may be altered, but it promises to be a night that you will never forget.
Reese wasn't much interested in any of what he had just said. This kind of two-penny show was reserved for the folks who had the money to throw around on needless things like smiling and having a nice evening. What Reese was far more interested in were the groups of men working behind the scenes, pulling various carts and setting up all of the stalls. A lot of them didn't look much older than him. A grin spread across his face. SCP-4409 insisted on being interviewed in the dark. With all the lights in the interview chamber switched off, Dr. Simon Crossley entered the room and sat down across from the Elephant Man. Even in the dim light, though, he was able to still make out part of the man's features: the ivory tusks, the hanging nose, and the nervously twitching ears. The man had been picked up in St. Louis, where local police had found him panhandling in the streets. While he certainly seemed harmless enough, it was important for the Foundation to take him in just to be sure. Sitting in the dark interview room, Reese Freeman was apprehensive at first about telling his side of the story. A life of being mocked, spat on, and chased out of towns had left him with a real distrust of other people. That was probably made worse by his apprehension at being put in another cage within the Foundation. He told Dr. Crossley that he was born as normal as could be, that his current ghastly affliction was something done to him quite some time ago, but as much as it pained him to recollect, it was a tale that he knew he'd probably have to tell. Dr. Crossley replied that he was all ears. It took Dr. Crossley a few seconds to realize his faux pas. SCP-4409 glared at him before continuing to explain how he was made the way he was. Reese Freeman had managed to land a job with the circus surprisingly easily, despite having no previous experience and no references to back him up. Herman Fuller took a shine to him. It was menial work, and not many folks were up to doing it, but since Reese had never had a job before, he didn't know any better. He started out at the bottom of the ladder, scraping out feces, washing down old cages, and carrying heavy crates. The once scrawny 14-year-old boy quickly turned into a stocky 17-year-old with broad shoulders and strong legs. They would travel from town to town across most of the United States, stopping off in major cities for weeks at a time to bring in as much money as possible before moving on. Reese didn't save much of that money, but he didn't mind. The fact that he got 2 meals a day and something to do with himself was enough. In fact, he kind of enjoyed sleeping on top of the carts as the horses pulled them across the dusty American roads. The one thing that always seemed to affect him, though, was that he was never allowed to actually see inside the tents. He would see folks come and go through the canvas doors week after week, but was never allowed so much as a peek inside himself. The older guys were responsible for throwing the canvas sheets over the cages, which would remain that way as they traveled. Not having seen much of the world at that point, Reese didn't have much of an idea of what could be in those cages. Perhaps some kind of animal from a foreign country, something from Africa or Asia. They made all kinds of noise. Reese said that most of them sounded like humans, but then they'd go and make strange animal sounds that no human mouth could ever produce. One night, his curiosity got the better of him. Hanging back before the crowds got into the tent, he sidestepped over to the entrance, making sure that no one saw him, and took a peek through the doorway. It was dark inside, too dark to make out much of what was happening. The crowd of people was standing between him and the cage, all jostling and leaning this way and that, trying to make out whatever it was that was inside. A screeching sound filled the air, making the whole crowd and Reese outside jump right. Standing on his tiptoes, he tried his best to see what was moving around in that cage. It seemed to be moving around like a person, lurching this way and that, but the sounds coming from it sounded more like a bird. And sure enough, after a moment, a huge pair of disproportionately ugly wings stretched out from either side of the creature, flapping and sending a rush of air through the tent so powerful that it blew the flap wide open in front of him, just as Herman Fuller turned around to see him standing there. Reese bolted and hid behind one of the carts. He was going to be in trouble for this. He was sure of it. It was one of Fuller's only rules of the circus, and he had just gone and broken it. He was in the hottest water imaginable. But as nighttime fell and the dregs of the spectators wandered out of the tent, Fuller seemed to be in too bad a mood at all. Watching him from a distance, Reese got the impression that he might not actually be in as much trouble as he thought. Fuller caught his eye and came over, cane twirling and top hat sitting jauntily atop his head. Reese got off on the wrong foot, apologizing right away for spying into the tent. The circus master just laughed it off and slapped him on the back.
Reese, my boy, don't worry about it. I've got much bigger plans for you. Much, much bigger.
That night, as Reese lay in bed, he had a terrible dream about what he had seen in the tent that day. Circus of the Disquieting was certainly an apt title for this place. The image of that strange, shadowy bird person in the cage haunted his nightmares until suddenly, 2 pairs of strong hands gripped him and ripped him out of his sleep. He knew better than to fight back. This was surely going to be his comeuppance for breaking Fuller's rules earlier. They dragged him into the main tent where there was an oil lamp in the middle, illuminating what looked like a heavy wooden operating table. His wrists and ankles were strapped in, and then the 2 men left him alone. He had half a mind to scream, but with all the caged-up creatures from the circus around him, he doubted anyone would pay him much mind. It was almost an hour before Herman Fuller walked into the tent. By this point, Reese expected him to be walking in with surgical equipment, gloves, maybe even a saw, but the man had nothing in his bare hands. Herman Fuller asked him if he ever heard of Joseph Merrick. Reese didn't answer. Of course he'd heard of the Elephant Man. The whole world had been talking about Joseph Merrick for months. A man born so hideously deformed that people had compared him to an elephant, though the resemblance wasn't that convincing. This sentiment was clearly shared by Fuller, who placed one hand on either side of Reese's face and began to softly massage his cheeks, explaining how disappointed he was that Merrick didn't actually look all that much like an elephant. Reese's cheeks started to hurt as the man massaged him, almost as if he was stretching and pulling at his face, finding loose skin. The boy asked Fuller what he was doing. The circus master just smiled at him and explained that it was an old technique handed down in his family. A gift, he called it. He started touching Reese's nose, gently pulling at it with more and more pressure. Much to Reese's surprise, he felt his nose elongating, growing longer and longer in the man's hand. He tried to twitch his face and was starting to find that his new nose twitched along with it. The longer it grew, the more painful it felt, the skin and flesh from his head being ripped and pulled into a new shape. At several points, Reese felt ready to pass out from the agony, but the circus master kept talking to him, kept him awake through the whole ordeal as he molded the boy's face like clay into the shape of an elephant. Lying on the bench panting, Reese could see his trunk from between his two eyes. It was a nightmare. That was all it was. But then Fuller reached under the workbench and lifted out a small hand drill. One by one, he punched holes into the top of Reese's trunk, installing little valves like a trumpet as he went. Standing back to admire his handiwork, he told Reese that he would be his new favorite attraction. "My boy, I have made you into a star." The tusks did not come straight away. Over the course of several months, they slowly and painfully emerged from his deformed jaw. His elephantine legs were also not part of his initial transformation, but instead came as a result of health issues he developed while being trapped in a cage for several decades. Crowds of people would come and go, flocking to see the Elephant Man. Having spent the first part of his life constantly hungry, Reese was now being overfed every day. Hands would come to his cage and force him to eat rich, fatty foods, denying him any possibility of exercise. The broad shoulders and strong legs that he had developed while working at the circus melted away under layers and layers of fat. His skin went gray and papery, folding and wrinkling in on itself, either from Fuller's magic or just from a lack of sunlight. Whatever it was, with every passing day, Reese Freeman steadily became more and more hideous. SCP-4409 was stuck in the circus for much of his life. Eventually, Herman Fuller moved on and is currently being hunted by the SCP Foundation. When he did, SCP-4409 was able to bargain for its freedom from the circus. Wandering from city to city, never sticking around for very long, SCP-4409 begged for change at the side of the road. Some people would feel sympathy, while most would feel horror at its disfigurement. From its years trapped in a cage, SCP-4409 has developed severe health issues, including gout, severe obesity, and metabolic syndrome. While in Foundation custody, it is fed a special diet to counteract these conditions. As of yet, the Foundation has no way of reversing what was done to Reese Freeman in the tent in the 1800s. As Reese poses no threat to the Foundation, he is allowed to live with relative freedom, or at least as much freedom as a contained SCP can earn. His health condition severely limits his mobility around Site-66, a low-security residential containment area. Unable to walk even moderate distances, SCP-4409 heavily relies on the use of a cane and a heavy-duty walker, capable of supporting up to 140 kilograms. Researchers listen intently at his door, waiting to hear if he's ever going to play a sad song on his trumpet, but no sound ever emerges, except for his heavy breathing and spluttering coughs. It appears that having spent decades locked in a small cage, a sedentary life is all he knows now. With every opportunity to exercise, read books, and take up new hobbies, SCP-4409 appears unable to engage with anything other than sitting and staring at the same spot on the wall every day. If an animal has spent its whole life living in a zoo and finds in its old age that one of the walls has fallen down, what use has it in taking a step outside? It has been often said that dog is man's best friend, and obviously that isn't just exclusive to men. Ask any pet owner, whether they own a dog, cat, rabbit, hamster, or soul-sucking interdimensional parasitic monster with too many tentacles, and they'll all tell you the same. Your pet can be your best friend. They can give you the most unconditional, affectionate form of love possible. And as long as you treat your little buddy right, they'll be loyal to you for the rest of your life and theirs. It's not uncommon for a pet to outlive their owner, especially if they belong to someone who's elderly. And that might be a sad thing to think about for some. Although it is important to remember the positives, like how much happiness and companionship that animal would have brought an aging owner in their last years of life. Even someone younger who dies unexpectedly might have had their quality of life infinitely improved by owning a loving pet to make them smile. But on the other hand, there's the negative downside that now some pets have to live on after a tragic death, not fully understanding where their beloved owner went. So often we hear stories of dogs that waited for their master to come home, only for them to never walk through the front door again. And it's equally hard when things pan out the opposite way, and an owner loses their pet. The one silver lining is that we as human beings have a far greater understanding of death and the grief it causes. We know that eventually, despite how hard it can be to adjust to that initial heartbreaking loss, it is possible to move on, and for things to one day get better. But what happens when someone can't accept the death of their beloved animal companion? When the unconditional love of their pet is suddenly missing from their life, how far will a person go to recapture that feeling? How long does it take for grief born out of love to become an unhealthy fixation? And what is the true price of obsession? Well, the answer involves SCP-589, both what it can give and just as easily take away. For as long as she could remember, and even further back than that, Erin and her dog Poncho had been inseparable. Ever since her mom had first adopted that scrappy little Jack Russell Terrier, Erin had fallen head over heels in love with that little rascal. Loving a pet is different from loving another person, because they just can't help showing how much they love you back. Humans, for all their good qualities, are so nuanced, and not everyone is honest with each other all of the time. But a pet, especially a dog, even though they can't speak, a bark or a whimper or excited wagging of a tail can easily tell you how they're feeling. And Poncho was no exception. Erin and her mom Cleo lived alone. It was just the two of them for quite a long time. And while Cleo had little problem with that, she couldn't help but notice how isolating it was for her daughter. From a young age, Erin had always been quiet, kept to herself at school. Her mom kept expecting her to make some friends, asked to invite them over or vice versa, but it didn't seem to be happening. It didn't seem to be bothering her daughter, but Cleo was worried that it was giving her the wrong idea, that being on her own was somehow better. So, in an effort to give Erin at least one source of companionship, Poncho joined the family. Brown patches dotted over his white fur, he was the perfect pet, an excitable and loving little puppy that Erin was immediately smitten with. When Cleo told her he was hers to keep, being only 7 years old, Erin broke down crying with tears of joy. Her mom had let her pick out a name for him, and she'd quickly settled on Poncho. At first, Erin had meant to say it differently, in order to name the pup after a friendly character from her favorite animated movie, but had mispronounced it in her excitement at meeting the energetic dog for the first time. The name quickly stuck though, and as the years went on and Poncho got bigger, Erin bought her four-legged best friend a little poncho of his own to wear when it started raining. Over the following years, Poncho became Erin's most constant and loving companion. Even as she grew up, moving through her childhood, and found making friends a little easier with every passing year, there never came a time when she didn't need her best friend. When Erin had her first breakup in high school and came home with floods of tears in her eyes, Poncho could sense she was upset and came wandering up to her, sitting in her lap to make her feel just a little bit better. Then a few years later, when her mom got sick, Erin had to take care of her, a task that would have been much harder without Poncho there to alleviate that stress and lift her and Cleo's spirits. And when Cleo eventually passed, the little white and brown dog sat quietly with his owner as she said goodbye to her mom. Now that it was just the two of them, Erin and Poncho were living in a tiny apartment. It was cramped for one person and a dog, but Erin was just grateful to have a place to live in the company of her favorite pup. Besides, Poncho wasn't a puppy anymore. In fact, he hadn't raced around the park or chased a ball for quite a long time. With the numerous stresses of her everyday life, least of all holding down 2 jobs in her desperate attempts to make enough money to pay rent, Erin had hardly noticed the signs. Poncho was showing his age. It had been happening gradually in the background over the years. He wouldn't chase the ball or really move around much, and when he did, it was little more than a lethargic plod around the apartment. Perhaps it was because of such a measured, slower-paced change that Erin was unable to acknowledge it. She could see her old friend was getting more tired, sleeping longer, his tail rarely wagging as much as it used to. But by now, that felt like Poncho's normal behavior. Then again, given how important her dog was to her, it's just as likely she didn't want to accept the truth that unfortunately, nothing lasts forever. He was almost 15 in human years, which by all accounts is an impressive age for a dog, especially one of Poncho's size and breed. It was on a day that Erin was out working her morning job when it happened. The faithful, adoring Jack Russell Terrier, who had spent his years being nothing but loved and giving back only more love in return, curled up on Erin's bed. The apartment was still, silent, not a sound to be heard, save for those last, tired few breaths. Laying there, maybe the dog wondered if he'd ever get to see his friend again, if she would make it back from work in time. He closed his little brown eyes and peacefully drifted off for one last sleep. During the break between her shifts, after the end of the one at her first job and before starting her second, Erin had just enough time to get home. Usually, she had just had enough time to eat and get herself ready for the changeover, then quickly check on Poncho before having to dash back out. Poking her head into the bedroom, she saw her dog laying right there on her bed. There was a stillness to him that instantly made her stomach drop. His ears didn't move when she called his name. He didn't react when she stroked his fur. He was gone. And the moment she realized it, Erin felt like her whole world had come crashing down. The loss of her oldest and closest friend hurt almost as much as losing her mom. Erin always felt that the problem with funerals wasn't just how sad they were, or how it always seemed to rain when she went to one. Instead, it was more that they could never properly sum up just how much someone truly meant. Nobody could ever condense the years' worth of love and memories into a burial, and it was worse when losing a pet. There was no procession, no wake, nobody else there, just her and Poncho, saying goodbye a final time. Eventually, things got to be too much. The heartbreak of Poncho's death was another struggle in a lifetime of lows that had all left their lasting wounds on Erin. That, coupled with the stress of trying to carry on with a busy life, barely able to keep herself afloat in either of her jobs, had pushed her to the edge of a breakdown. Maybe that's what summoned it. Perhaps something had sensed all of Erin's mental anguish and had come to seek her out. It might have been that her wishes for something, some little alleviation to all the pain and stress, were finally being granted. Or maybe it was just a gift left by her neighbor. The sun had long since set when Erin arrived back at her apartment, stepping over the envelopes that littered her doormat, a few with words like overdue and urgent notice printed on them in red ink. Passing through the hallway, Erin paused as she always did, hoping to hear the gentle pattering of paws against the floor. Her therapist had dissuaded her from doing that, saying it would only make moving on from losing Poncho worse. She didn't care. She wanted her dog back. And opening the door to her bedroom, it seemed like someone had been listening. Sat on her bed was a stuffed animal right in the spot where she'd found her little friend on that horrible day. It had been made to look like a dog, specifically resembling a Jack Russell Terrier, with brown patches over its white fur. The plushie was even wearing a little rain poncho. The sight of it was enough to cause Erin to break down in tears, weeping in heavy sobs as she dashed across the bedroom to hold it in her arms. Hugging it tightly, her tears seeped into the soft fur as she felt it against her face. She didn't even think to question where it had even come from. All she wanted to do in that moment was hold the stuffed animal close. For the first time in what felt like years, a feeling of relief washed over Erin. It was as if everything was melting away. The stress of work and the toll of her tiring shifts gone. All the pain from losing Cleo and Poncho dissipated too. In fact, it felt like she now had her beloved dog back. No, it was better than that. It was almost as though everything about Poncho, his energy, his spirit, the way he made her feel so calm and loved was all distilled into this stuffed animal. And now, it would never grow old, never age and die, causing her more pain. Erin gripped the soft toy tightly. The longer she held the hug for, the more her stress and sadness faded. Her face was still wet with tears, although her sobbing had gradually become low, gentle chuckles soon giving way to a peal of uncontrollable laughter rising in volume. It was as though she had taken something, and the very chemistry of her brain was being altered. But after so much hardship, it felt good, to the point where she was almost lightheaded. Laying down on the floor of her bedroom, arms locked around the plushie that reminded her so much of Poncho, Erin continued softly giggling to herself. Her entire body relaxed, so much so that every part of her felt like warm butter, as if she was about to start melting through the floorboards. Although she didn't know it, or probably wouldn't have even cared, her dopamine levels were spiking, flooding her with the bodily hormone that relieves stress and makes a person feel good. In fact, right now, she was feeling better than she ever had. Every day that followed, Erin would come home to her stuffed animal, her Poncho 2, as she liked to think of it. It didn't bother her how childlike anyone else might find it for a grown woman to rely so heavily on a plushie for comfort. At any rate, it wasn't something she was advertising to anyone else. After every shift at both of her jobs, she'd race back to her apartment, right to Poncho 2, and just sit there, just basking in the way it made her feel. It was the most all-encompassing sense of euphoria and relief, reducing her stress so much that she felt like she was floating, her body lighter than air. That feeling was all that mattered to her. Some days she wouldn't even eat. Poncho 2 was more important to her than food. Gradually, she started to become addicted to that feeling. Having to wait until the end of her work shifts to feel that rush of happy chemicals flood her brain was too long of a delay. She started to crave it while working, unable to focus, feeling erratic and restless without Poncho 2. Of course, she couldn't risk bringing it to work with her. What if someone took it, or she dropped it? Her boss might see her with a stuffed animal at her desk and fire her on the spot, or think that she was absolutely crazy. The only safe place for her source of relief was at home, but Erin knew she needed something to bridge the gap while she was working. The only substitute that worked was taking a photo of Poncho 2 on her phone, then blowing it up and printing off a copy. Erin could carry it around portably, keeping it in her pocket and taking it out to look at it every few minutes while she worked. The hit of positive chemicals it gave her wasn't quite as strong as getting to hold her stuffed animal. After all, it was just a grainy photo from her phone, essentially acting like a patch to tide her over until she could get back home to the real thing. However, it didn't take long for Erin to start taking Poncho with her anywhere that wasn't work, to the grocery store, to visit her mom and her dog, and, of course, to therapy. "I'm rather concerned about this pattern of behavior," Erin's psychotherapist Dr. Lee stated when her patient explained what had been happening. Sitting across on the opposite side of her office on a leather couch, Erin had Poncho 2 pressed tightly against her. "I don't care," she sighed, her brain already awash with hormones that kept her calm. "I like how it makes me feel, so I don't care." "Erin, look at yourself," Dr. Lee urged. "You aren't properly dealing with your grief. It seems to me you're channeling all your desire for positive emotion into this stuffed animal." "Poncho 2, Erin corrected her without taking her eyes off the soft brown and white dog and its little cloak. "Listen to me," the therapist insisted, trying desperately to get through to her. "Poncho, your dog, your real dog, is gone. You lost him 6 months ago. And your mom, Cleo, she passed away too. You have to process and come to terms with those things, as sad as they might make you feel." That's how we move on. But what you're doing right now isn't healthy, Erin. It's becoming an obsession. Turning away, Erin pressed Poncho 2 up against her face. I don't care, she repeated. By now, Erin had become fully dependent on Poncho 2, showing up late for both jobs just so she could spend longer feeling those endorphins and hormones that hugging the stuffed animal seemed to bring. It didn't take long for her to start skipping entire shifts for days at a time and canceling any and all other plans just to sit at home basking in the relief brought on by her apparent obsession. Her apartment became a mess, untidied piles of mail by the front door, the walls plastered with hundreds of photos of her stuffed animal, fueling her obsession. Her evening job was the first to fire Erin, citing her recent absences as the grounds for her dismissal. Even then, she still didn't seem to care. The fact she might not be able to make rent barely registered. Returning home after her other job called her in to tell Erin she would no longer be working there either. She instantly looked around for Poncho 2, but it was nowhere to be found. All the photos on the walls having faded, Erin checked her phone. All the original copies of the pictures were gone too. Instantly racked with fear, so addicted to the plushie that she could barely function without it, she began tearing her apartment to shreds looking for it. She wrenched cupboards off their hinges and tipped over her refrigerator. Flipping her mattress, Erin sliced the fabric open with a kitchen knife, searching high and low for Poncho 2, but unable to find it anywhere. She became frantic, erratic, pulling her hair out in a fit of uncontrollable despair. Where had it gone? Had someone stolen it? Dr. Lee. The paranoia had already set in, convincing Erin that her therapist must have taken Poncho 2. She was the only other person who knew about it, and had been so critical of her using it to make herself feel better. Marching into Dr. Lee's office, utterly enraged beyond reason, all Erin could think about was getting her stuffed animal back, no matter what she had to do. The effect it had on her was so powerful, so potent, and addictive, that living without it was worth anything, even another person's life. Little did Erin realize, as her hands grew wetter, coated with more of Dr. Lee's blood after every bludgeoning strike, her therapist had no idea where Poncho 2 was. In fact, she had nothing to do with it vanishing in the first place. It had disappeared all on its own, along with all the photographed copies Erin had printed. Arriving somewhere miles away, SCP-589 was ready to begin the whole cycle again on its next victim. It would take on whatever shape it needed to appease the desires of the very next person to find it, preying on their vulnerability and making them totally dependent on it. That was what it did. Everywhere it went, leeching off people that it could easily manipulate. Its presence and interaction would calm SCP-589's victims, helping to alleviate their stress or make them feel better about their deepest insecurities. Before long, these helpless victims would be able to think of nothing else, feeling as if they were unable to live without their obsession doll. And every time, that was when SCP-589 would make its cruelest move. It would vanish, leaving its prey in a state of intense withdrawal. With the calming influence of SCP-589 absent from their lives all of a sudden, the infected people would suffer from a variety of potential psychological symptoms: manic depression, psychosis, uncontrollable despair, dementia, or in Erin's case, paranoia, and a heightened sense of aggression that caused her to murder Dr. Lee. That was one of the earliest in a spate of similar incidents that had been reported. As SCP-589 traveled from town to town, its influence spread, leaving entire populations dead in its wake. All the while, the stuffed animal fed on the mental anguish that it caused its victims, making them pay the ultimate price for their obsession.
When you think of the biggest, most money-making, merchandised, and capitalized game series of all time, there's only one franchise that comes to mind: Pokémon. For the entirety of its lifespan, Pokémon has been a financial powerhouse, and every year the series seems to grow in popularity and revenue. Whether it's games, cards, a show, toys, or even Pokémon-branded clothes that you need, you'll have no difficulty finding a product that appeals to you. Everyone knows Pikachu's face, and nearly every child born within the past 20 years has had a first-hand experience with Pokémon. It is, in some respects, inescapable. If you hate Pokémon, too bad.
because this little electric mouse runs the world, and you'll just have to sit back and deal with it. One could even say that Pokemon is uncontainable, which poses quite the issue for the SCP Foundation, who work tirelessly to ensure that no facet of life is withheld from its reach. But the Foundation rarely deals with major franchises, beloved by millions upon millions of people across the world, and for good reason too. An anomaly tied in with a major franchise poses a lot of problems on the containment side, namely its ability to spread uncontrollably and without care, being witnessed by countless individuals before the Foundation comes up with a way to contain it. Global supply lines have to be interrupted to prevent anomalous products from hitting shelves, corporate espionage committed, and most of all, a massively expensive cover-up operation to remove said products from consumers' hands. If the Foundation had to deal with an anomaly affecting the Pokemon franchise, there's no telling how out of hand it would get before they'd be able to get a handle on the situation. But in 2019, that's exactly what happened. Today we're going to be looking at SCP-5254, an anomaly dubbed Gotta Catch 'Em All in the Foundation's database. The year was 2019, the place Japan, the home country of the Pokemon franchise. Every year since 2014, the Pokemon Company has held a festival named Pikachu Outbreak in the city of Yokohama, in which hundreds of costumed actors dressed as Pikachu would crowd the city's Mirai district and perform, dance, and even participate in a parade. The event was intended to celebrate the Pokemon franchise and promote whatever the latest venture the series is pushing, whether it's a game, a movie, or something else. The festival proved to be successful and has been held every year since. After all, who wouldn't want to see a legion of Pikachu running amok through the streets? But the fun would be short-lived during the 2019 outbreak, where something incredibly unusual occurred. Picture this: a large crowd, hundreds of fans dressed in Pokemon-themed attire, standing on both sides of the streets. Men, women, children, anyone and everyone came to see the Pikachu outbreak, and they weren't disappointed. Parading down the street was a horde of Pikachu, just as advertised. They danced, bounced, and walked together in routine fashion, all while the crowd cheered and yelled. Even the spectators in the crowd showed their spirit with Pikachu-themed hats, yellow tails fastened to their backs, and yellow face masks with 2 electrified red circles on the cheeks. The parade proceeded as normal. That is, until one of the parading Pikachu started behaving oddly. It began as out-of-sync movements, strange wobbles, and deviations from the parade path. For the heavily coordinated Outbreak Festival, this was unusual. The rest of the Pikachu line danced to the beat of the music, sticking in formation as best as they could. Then, as if pushed by an invisible force, the strange Pikachu raced forward, diving headfirst into the crowd, barreling into the group of people and eventually colliding. The crowd moved out of the way, slightly shocked, no pun intended, by what had occurred. But then it happened again. 2 more Pikachu ran into the crowd, and then again. Over 15 Pikachu rammed themselves into the crowd, resulting in a massive disruption of the parade and the shutdown of the event entirely. The Foundation quickly caught wind of this and sent their closest operatives to assess the situation in a controlled fashion. After blocking off the crowd and shutting down the event, another strange detail emerged. One that ensured the Foundation that there had been some sort of anomalous significance to what was occurring here. Some of the crowd members involved in the collisions were suffering very peculiar medical injuries, namely blunt force trauma way stronger than what a clash with a costumed actor would induce, and severe electrical burns. The Foundation was positive there was something occurring here, and with a franchise as vast and popular as Pokemon, they didn't want to take any chances. Immediately, Foundation agents began collecting information on the event, setting up probes in the offices of Game Freak and the Pokemon Company, and attempting to get to the bottom of what exactly happened during the parade. When the Foundation interrogated the 15 mascots who collided with the crowd, they were shocked to learn that they weren't mascots at all, but instead fully separate entities that resembled the Pikachu costume. X-rays revealed that their once human skeletons were now fused to their costumes, and touching them produced a minor electric shock. The performers had become Pikachu, and now they were unable to be removed from their costumes. Every captured instance had expired before the Foundation was able to fully study and discern what was occurring to them, their bodies unable to support themselves after such a lethal, extreme transformation. Later observation found that the synthetic components of the costumes, such as the cotton and plastic composites, had fused into their flesh and muscle tissue. Bodily fluids were found to contain foreign DNA and numerous strange structures, to the point where an ordinary human's genetic makeup would be incomparable and unrecognizable with that affected by the anomaly. The Foundation tentatively opened a file on SCP-5254, the anomalous transformation of a human into the rough approximation of a Pokémon character, and began carrying out tests to determine what occurred during the festival. What caused SCP-5254 to manifest? It couldn't have been random, could it? The Foundation needed to know. One theory that the researchers working on the SCP-5254 file had come up with was that it was the large gathering of Pokémon-related clothing worn by the crowd that prompted the transformation. But that begged the question, why hadn't this occurred at any previous festivals or large Pokémon-related gatherings? It was a huge franchise. There were absolutely more events that had masses of costume fans donning Pokémon-related gear. Did something happen in recent years to manifest this anomaly? The only way to find out was to conduct testing. In one of the easier experiments that a D-Class personnel was tasked with carrying out, the Foundation ordered a group of them to dress entirely in Pokémon-related clothing, which the Foundation provided themselves. Some items, such as a full-bodied Gardevoir onesie, were taken from Dr. Clef's personal collection itself. No, he is not taking further questions. Anyways, with the D-Class looking utterly ridiculous in full Pokémon getup, the observing researchers began their tests. First was a D-Class outfitted solely in a Pokémon Pikachu big face with ears hat, as the product's official title stated. After standing there for 15 minutes, the Foundation determined that there was no discernible effect. Next was a Pokémon Detective Pikachu cosplaying masked latex, which the Foundation placed on the same D-Class. After another 15 minutes with no changes observed, the D-Class closed the experiment, remarking that it was stupid. The research team told the D-Class to remain composed and to just continue along with the trials unless they wanted to be reprimanded. After that was a Daboon Adult Onesie Pikachu Animal Pajamas. A few researchers held back laughter as the hardened, muscular D-Class in front of them stood around in a Pikachu onesie that barely fit him. After asking him how he was feeling, the subject quickly turned aggressive. The results from this test were deemed inconclusive, due to researchers being unable to determine if the quick snap in anger was as a result of a potential anomaly or whether the D-Class was just getting fed up with having to do this. In my opinion, this test was hilarious. For the next test, two D-Classes were brought in, clad in Pikachu onesies. The D-Class were placed 4 meters apart. After a period of time, a tingling sensation was reported in the arms and legs, akin to that pins and needles feeling you get when your arms fall asleep, or when you get shocked by static electricity. The next one had 4 D-Classes, all dressed similar to the previous group. Instead of being meters apart, they were asked to hold hands, which the D-Classes begrudgingly did. Severe migraines were reported, as well as throbbing pain in the cranium and lower jaws of the face. Near the tailbone, some D-Classes reported a dull aching. Most curiously, several areas on their body had begun to change in skin coloration, namely, a mustard yellow. Eventually, the Foundation began to test for an affiliation or emotional connection to the Pokémon franchise. Could that be the key to understanding SCP-5254? Another 4 D-Class, all noted Pokémon fans, were brought in. One had owned a copy of Pokémon Yellow for the Game Boy when he was a child, and another had a high-leveled account on the Pokémon Go app. The Foundation discovered that these D-Class reported muscle spasms along the extent of their spines, with one complaining of tightness in their chest before coughing up tufts of fur, and another physically recoiling upon an attempt at physical contact, in fear they would electrically shock the researcher. These experiments proved to be fruitful for the Foundation, as they learned that SCP-5254 was irreversible. Removing the clothing or items did not result in the transformative properties of SCP-5254 reversing. Furthermore, the testing went on beyond this point, just to cover all possible bases of what SCP-5254 was before the details were properly ironed out. A total of 56 D-Class personnel were lost during these experiments, and testing paused due to concern by Foundation higher-ups of a potential security breach and damage being done to the site's power grid. But most importantly, a connection to the Pokémon brand was what enabled SCP-5254 to truly take effect. That's what occurred at the Outbreak Festival, where the bodies of costume Pikachu fanatics fused into their costumes and barreled towards the crowd. Now that the Foundation understood the how of SCP-5254, they still had to get to the why. Even by Foundation standards, this is a pretty odd and random anomaly. Did the answers lie with Game Freak or the Pokémon Company itself? After the festival incident, the Foundation put web probes into the servers of the Pokémon Company's Japanese branch and had their web crawlers scan through millions of correspondence emails to find any hint of unusual behavior. A series of emails between major shareholders in the company were found. The first was from Kimishima Tatsumi, the CEO of Nintendo, the overseeing company above the Pokémon Company, and Tsunekazu Ishihara, the latter's CEO. Do not ask questions. If this Sir Viper wants manpower for his project, give it to him. Our society will not mess with these irrelevant individuals. Whoever he claims to be, may be charging us a small fortune, but at least he seems genuinely interested in bringing our creations to life. Bringing their creations to life? How curious. The email was dated to 2017. 2 years before the Outbreak incident. The Foundation decided to dig deeper. Another email from 2017 exchanged between the two individuals months after the first. Tuesday will mark the 5th visit by the Fukushima orphanage to our headquarters. I told the press it's part of our global outreach program to spread the joy of Pokémon to the rest of the world. Early results have been positive. I should have a specimen to show you the next time we meet in Tokyo. Your daughter likes Eevee, yes? It seemed like these executives were talking about creating real Pokémon somehow. What did the orphanage have to do with this? Another email read, "Play anytime, anywhere, with anyone." Yes, the slogan for the Switch is very apt for what we're trying to accomplish. Your marketing team deserves a raise. I am pleased to report Pokémon Go has hit 750 million unique downloads in July, and 5 million daily average users this past week. The popularity of the franchise continues to grow. Think of the possibilities once we integrate augmented reality (AR) technology into the project. Altaria as a clean and efficient form of air transportation. Charizard serving in the self-defense forces. And yes, Pikachu making our reliance on nuclear energy a thing of the past. Soon Pokémon will come to life before our very eyes. The Foundation couldn't believe something as absurd as creating real Pokémon was a genuine possibility for these companies. It was going on right beneath their noses. But the emails from 2018 began to show cracks in the Pokémon Company and Nintendo's plans. The accidents are growing in number. Are you sure Sir Viper has everything under control? We cannot hide these incidents from the public forever. We already have our hands full trying to catch the runaways. If we don't take action soon, more people will get hurt, or worse, the Pokémon brand will be tarnished forever. Whoever was responsible for creating Pokémon for the companies was going by the alias of Sir Viper, and it seemed like their experiments weren't working the way they planned. An email directly addressed to Sir Viper fully encapsulated the Pokémon company's disgust at the individual once they realized the experiments weren't succeeding in creating an immersive, fun Pokémon experience in the real world. You promised us Pokémon as pets and companions, not these mutations. I've had to recall thousands of faulty merchandise, with tens of thousands of defective products still circulating the market. Just what kind of sorcery have you forced upon our hands? The government is breathing down my neck. Tatsumi-san has had to resign, and I'm starting to hear about this Foundation poking around. Tell me the truth. Is there any way to reverse the effects, or have you doomed us all? Sir Viper 1995, as their screen name read, responded with this. I don't know what to tell you. I've given the people what they want. Only true fans will get a Pokémon of their own. Your company was the very best at building your brand. Congratulations. Today Pokémon has taken over our hearts and minds. Perhaps one day, we will see them take over the world. and with that, the company had cut off all communication with Sir Viper. But now the Foundation had to get to the bottom of what was happening in these boardrooms and offices. Making Pokemon in real life? It sounded crazy, and from the way the emails were worded, they had apparently succeeded in making something, even if they considered it a failure. 3 months later, after all of the research on SCP-5254 was conducted, the Overseer Council authorized a raid on the Pokemon Company offices in Minato City, Tokyo, on June 16, 2019. From the way the emails were written, they had reason to believe that civilians were potentially being held against their will and used in these experiments. Failure to deal with them now could potentially spell disaster if they got out, and the cause of SCP-5254 wasn't immediately neutralized. Following the Japanese government's authorization of the raid, a Foundation Mobile Task Force detachment from Epsilon 11 Nine-Tailed Fox was stationed outside the offices. The task force broke into the building through the fire exit and promptly cleared out tourists and civilians from the area. During the raid, they encountered a large creature that resembled a Charizard, an orange fire-breathing dragon Pokemon, that stopped them in their tracks in the hallway. Wings and elongated snout, the perfect color. It looked exactly as if a Charizard had left from the screen and into real life. It spewed combustible orange liquid at the team, but they quickly dispatched it with ease, using their weapons to put some water on the Pokemon's fire. Well, the water was actually a salvo of bullets, but the metaphor still works. Most of the building was cleared, and those inside detained for further questioning. But then the team came to a set of steel doors. Inside was a room littered with toys, brightly colored walls, and large metal cages. Inside the cages were some of the most disgusting creations the team had ever witnessed. Sir Viper's failed experiments, clearly. Entities at various stages of SCP-5254 transformation. One resembled a Vulpix, a fox Pokemon. It had engorged eye sockets and blood flowing down their cheeks. Another cage had a boy with cheekbones protruding high and sideways, pulling thin skin over the rest of his face. Another had a large bear-like entity with serrated claws, with alternate fingers peeling and decomposing underneath. Most horrifying of all were a pair inside cages near the other side of the room. A girl with an extended, flattened, engorged tongue, which pulled drool onto the floor at her feet. She was made to resemble a Lickitung, a Pokemon with a similarly large tongue. Another was an elongated purple snake, like the Pokemon Arbok, except its head was that of a toddler. It writhed back and forth, bawling and screaming. The team requested immediate medical pickup to remove the specimens from the room. Wherever Sir Viper, the individual responsible for this, was, the Foundation could not locate them. The Foundation contained the experiments and detained Mr. Ishihara, the CEO of the company. He was brought back to the research site for an interview. Ishihara claimed not to know of the experiment's existence, but he quickly broke down. When asked about Sir Viper, Ishihara had this to say: "We didn't ask too many questions. When we found out what he had been doing to the children, we terminated his contract immediately, but the damage had been done. Later, we discovered he had already tampered with our production lines and distribution infrastructure. At this point, it's impossible to tell which products had been affected on the market." Following this, global coordination between Nintendo, the Foundation, and the Pokemon Company in an attempt to figure out a solution to products that were affected by SCP-5254 is presently ongoing. All attempts to contact Sir Viper 1995's email result in the same automated message: "Happy hunting, but even you can't catch them all."
There's an app for that. Wait, hold on! I'm Steve Jobs! Stop it!
It was a phrase so ubiquitous in the early days of the smartphone craze that it's hard to believe Apple actually has trademarked. It was a testament to a simple and immutable truth about the world these new touchscreen phones were creating. No matter how strange and obscure the need, there would be an app to fulfill it. Perhaps you remember iBeer, the app that allowed you to pretend you were drinking a tall glass of beer for some reason. There was Car Matey, an app that reminded you where you parked your car, in a pirate voice. And who could forget I Am Bread, a surreal game about controlling a sentient slice of bread on a quest to become toast. But there's one app out there somewhere on the market that you probably didn't download. And if you did, well, you have our sincerest apologies. Because even seeing this video pop out onto your feed probably sent a chill down your spine. Well, if that chill ever even left. Take it from one gentleman whose life took a very strange turn after downloading a certain app that the SCP Foundation calls SCP-1471. Because the sentiment, "there's an app for that," doesn't exclude experiencing mortal terror. Joe Lillis, an insurance salesman from Milwaukee, had just gone through another atrocious date. After a mediocre meal and an uncomfortable 35 minutes of inane babble, sensing the whole time that she really wasn't that interested, his date excused himself to take a quick phone call outside. Sadly for Joe, she never returned, leaving him to pick up the check. Of all the many words you could use to describe poor Joe Lillis, the most pertinent would be lonely. Ever since Carol, his wife of 10 years, had passed away in a freak accident, he'd been trying to find some kind of way to fill the void. They'd been high school sweethearts, intent on spending the rest of their lives with one another. As fate would have it, only Carol would get that tainted luxury. Joe would be forced to endure life after the joy of living had run its course. He only hoped he might be lucky enough to find love again. However, Joe was on the wrong side of 40, and as so many others his age were already hitched, he could feel his options going out one by one. Would he be destined to live out the rest of his days alone? Joe didn't feel like spending the back half of his life catching reruns of Seinfeld and tending to his fish. He needed to get out there. And thankfully, like the rest of us, he lived in the internet age. He had more apps, websites, online services, and hot Russian singles in his area than he knew what to do with. So surely one would have the right person for him. He tried them all: Tinder, Hinge, Match.com, Plenty of Fish, eHarmony, Bumble, Zoosk, OkCupid, Friend Finder, Deeply Lonely Singles with Low Expectations.com, and so much more. However, all it seemed to achieve was setting him up for more disappointment. None of the dates he'd managed to get ever resulted in anything getting serious. Heck, it was a minor miracle if he even managed to get any of them on a second date. Was this it? Was this his life now? Had he only ever gotten one shot at love, and the grasping claws of fate yanked it away from him without a second thought? Would life continue on the hamster wheel of loneliness? Sleeping, getting up, eating, working, and sleeping again, every day getting somehow both faster and slower as life trudged on to a disappointing yet inevitable conclusion? What a terrible fate to find yourself trapped in. Whenever Joe started feeling maudlin like this, he knew it was time to get proactive again. Maybe the right woman was out there. There were billions of them, after all. Surely at least one of them would be the perfect person for him. He just needed the perfect app. He'd burned through all of the most reputable apps already, and was now perusing some of the slightly seedier options, most of which were likely data mining fronts from the Balkans. However, as generic app after generic app passed, something different caught his eye. The icon was a smiling cartoon dog, and its name was Malo version 1.0.0. This gave him a little chuckle. At the very least, it was very different branding from the rest of the dating apps he'd seen. Maybe it had just been sorted into the wrong section of the App Store. He decided he'd check it out and take a look at the app's description. The description read, "Never settle for those awkward feelings of being alone ever again. Malo is an exciting and interactive experience that will keep you engaged and intrigued. The anxiety of social situations can be nerve-wracking, but after just a few hours of Malo, you will soon forget all about those painful emotions of disappointment. Be part of the new craze that is quickly becoming the next social substitute. Remember, the more you participate, the more Malo will engage you. Your experience is completely up to you. Absolutely no ads. Enjoy." Well, it certainly provoked Joe's curiosity at the very least. He did want to banish his feelings of loneliness, and seeing as the app was free and apparently had no ads, he'd surely be foolish to not at least give it a whirl. What's the worst that could happen? He began the installation, and only then noticed that the app had no listed developer. It took up 9.8 megabytes of memory, which he wasn't tech-savvy enough to see any issues with. More than anything, Joe was just enticed by the prospect of finally having another chance at companionship with Malo. After all, it is the next social substitute, whatever that means. However, Joe's excitement was quickly quashed when he hit the home screen button and noticed that the icon for the app never actually materialized. Strange. He checked the App Store portal again and saw that, according to them, the app had completely downloaded. What gives? Was it a glitch, or was Malo actually just malware? Either way, he was disheartened by the fact that this immaterial app certainly wouldn't be getting him any companionship. Or so he thought, anyway. Joe was used to disappointment by now, so he didn't take it too personally. He decided to just play out the rest of his evening on autopilot, making himself some soup, doing the laundry, watching more Seinfeld reruns, taking a cold shower, and preparing to cry himself to sleep again. Malo was already becoming a distant memory, just like all the deceptive sources of hope. But one strange thing happened that disrupted Joe's finely tuned evening routine. He received a text message. This was incredibly strange because nobody ever seemed to text him. The last text he got was from Carol just before her accident, so it was almost surreal to hear that alert sound now, after everything that happened. He checked and saw that the text was an image attachment sent from an unknown number. Perplexed yet curious, he decided to open it. His curiosity soon gave way to a kind of melancholy nostalgia when he saw that the photo was of his and Carol's favorite cafe in town. They'd spent many a morning there, back when she was alive, treating themselves to a nice cup of coffee and perhaps a croissant. Just seeing it again caused an involuntary smile to spread across his face. It never even occurred to him, as it probably would have to others, that this could be seen as a little creepy. He hadn't frequented the bakery since Carol died. How would anyone even know that this place held any significance for him? Was it a stalker, a ghost, or just a spooky coincidence? None of these thoughts even crossed Joe's mind. He was just grateful for the surprising reminder of the happiness he'd once had. For the next couple hours, things seemed lighter. He went about his evening, checking the photo every so often and smiling, until eventually he found himself in bed, still looking into the glow of his phone. It was such a beautiful little cafe. Then he froze. He noticed something in the picture. It'd been there the whole time, but only now he was seeing rather than just looking. It was in the corner, staring through the glass of the cafe's door. So faint he almost wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the light. It was a face. Well, not a face, more like a skull. Not a human, not anywhere near human. Long, slender, and canine, with protruding fangs and vacant white eyes. The pure white of the skull was buried in a nest of thick black hair. It looked like it was crouching behind the door, looking out and grinning, whatever the hell it was. Just seeing it changed the entire tone of the picture. It was no longer a simple reminder of bygone joy. Now all that was radiating out of that image was a palpable sense of dread. Was someone playing some kind of awful prank on him? Just then he was jogged from his contemplation by another alert. A new message from the same number as before. With great hesitation, he hovered his thumb over the push notification and clicked. That's when everything got a lot worse. It was a photo of a bus stop. Not just any bus stop, of course. It was stop C16, the one that Joe always took to get to work. It looked like it was taken relatively early in the morning, but nobody was there. Well, not quite nobody. There was that figure again. It stood at full height, behind the partially frosted glass that makes up the back of the bus stop. The same large black humanoid shape, with a white, grinning dog skull where the face should be. Something about it terrified him on such a primal level, like the way our lizard brain reacts to some ancient apex predator. And whatever this thing was, it clearly knew something about him. How else could it stage all these photos? Joe got out of bed and looked out of the window, down onto his dark front street. Empty, thankfully. But after this surprise nightmare, he wasn't going to take any chances. He grabbed a kitchen knife from downstairs and placed it on his bedside cabinet, right next to his phone, with 911 on speed dial. Joe Lillis, a 43-year-old man, slept with the lights on that night for the first time in over 30 years. Sadly for him, the nightmare was just beginning. The next morning, Joe woke up unharmed, but he wasn't pleased to see that he'd gotten several more texts in his sleep. There was one taken outside of the local insurance company office where he worked. The strange creature with the skull for a face was looming around the corner. peering at the camera with its lipless grin, like it was mocking him. Another photo was taken at the local supermarket where Joe did most of his grocery shopping. The frame was centralized on the cereal aisle, bordered on both sides by walls of garish mascots endlessly repeated. Down at the far end of the aisle was a looming dark figure with that cold canine skull where a human face should be. There were a few more, but worst of all was the last one. It was taken at the cemetery. In the foreground, a headstone reading, "Carol Lillis, beloved wife and daughter." Joe was horrified to see that skull-faced beast was rising up behind his wife's grave, long clawed fingers curling around the top of the headstone. That was the moment that Joe decided to go to the police about all of this, before things got even more out of hand. He called an Uber to get down to the station. He certainly didn't feel like he was going anywhere near his regular bus stop after last night. He showed the photos he'd been sent so far to an officer posted at the station, and they agreed that there was certainly something strange about it. While the behavior undeniably bordered on harassment, it hadn't yet delved into criminal territory, so he would sadly be on his own until then. The best they could do was stay in touch and kept abreast of any new developments. The only sage advice they could give him was not to delete the photos, as they could always be used as evidence in court later if things escalated. This was literally the last result that Joe wanted out of this. Considering how bizarre and threatening things were getting already, he really didn't want to find out what escalation looked like in this case. But what else could he do but carry on, just trying to exercise as much caution as he could in these strange new circumstances? He went to work and tried his best to stay productive, despite the fact that every 3 or so hours, a new photo would arrive. Places that he liked to sit in the local parks, stores he'd frequent, restaurants he liked to eat at. The nightmare skeleton dog thing would be standing in all of them, just mugging for the camera. On one hand, every time he looked at one of the photos, Joe felt like he was giving this freak exactly what they wanted. On the other hand, how could he possibly look away? What if he missed something that could save his life? It carried on much like that until later in the evening. Joe may have not been a genius, but he was no fool either. He'd seen too many of those seedy true crime documentaries about kidnapping to take his normal route home. He took a real detour, frequently checking over his shoulder the entire time. Much to his relief, he didn't see anything out of place. Good. When he got home, he locked every door and bolted every window. Nothing would be getting the jump on him tonight. That's when the next picture came in. A photograph of Joe's empty office cubicle, with the bony face of the creature looming over the divider with a grin. He could feel his heart pounding away in his chest just looking at it. How did this thing get around like this? How was it able to infiltrate everywhere in his entire goddamn life? Suddenly, he felt a smile spreading across his face. This freak had just messed up big time. Before, all these creepy photos had been taken in public places, but the one taken in his office? Oh, this crossed the line into trespassing. The police would have to do something about it now. It had given him an ace up his sleeve. That confidence faded a few hours later when he received another photo. This time, it was the skull-faced monster just standing on the sidewalk. The sidewalk that Joe remembered walking on his covert alternative route. He could feel himself break into a cold sweat. It seemed whoever this was, he really did hold no secrets from them. Now more than ever, Joe didn't feel safe in his own home. So you can only imagine how he felt when a few hours later, he received a photo of the skull-faced stalker standing right outside his own front door, staring into the camera. It sent him rushing to the window again to check outside, but of course, nobody was there. The next day, when he called the police and updated them on the situation, they told him that they were doing all they could. The best thing he could possibly do was to remain calm, but vigilant. He needed to keep an eye on the photos being sent to him, so he could notify them if ever he was in any immediate danger. This put poor Joe's paranoia at a fever pitch. Even when he went to work, surrounded by his coworkers, by witnesses, he could scarcely tear his eyes away from his phone. He was a slave to the photos, forever waiting for the next one, only to experience crushing regret when the photo actually arrived. It looked like it was taken moments before it was sent to him. Joe saw himself looking at his own phone in his office cubicle, with that huge skull-faced figure looming behind him. He screamed out loud upon seeing it and turned to see if anything was behind him. But of course, there was nothing there. The police inspected the office, talked to potential witnesses, and analyzed the photo. It showed no signs of any photographic manipulation, but there were also no witnesses around the office who claimed to see anything strange that day. There was also no security camera footage in the last several days that showed this figure coming in or out. Joe Lillis started to feel like he was going insane, and perhaps he was. But that didn't change the tangible and ever-present feeling that he was in great danger. He didn't come into work the next day. He'd received more photos like that in the night, of himself, taken in real time, with that skull-faced freak looming. He didn't want to leave the house. He didn't want to go anywhere anymore. He just didn't feel safe out there. How could he, with all this madness unfolding? There was a time where he could have said something like, "At least it only seems confined to my phone." He might have even suspected that it had something to do with that strange Malo app he downloaded a few days prior that hadn't seemed to do anything. But this situation had evolved since then. He wasn't just seeing the creature in photos anymore. It was here. He kept seeing quick flashes of it on the other side of windows, in reflections, in the corner of his eyes, always darting away if ever he turned towards it. It was everywhere and nowhere. It was here just for him. He just knew. The police couldn't help. Nobody could help. Joe just sat in the corner of his bedroom, clutching his kitchen knife, afraid to close his eyes. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. We know one thing for sure. Joe Lillis never felt truly alone ever again. He always had his new friend, waiting, just out of sight. And if ever you're feeling lonesome and decide to download Malo version 1.0.0 yourself, then you'll never feel lonely again either. Who doesn't love their pets, right? Whether it's a dog, a cat, a goldfish, or a hamster, any pet owner will tell you that their furry friend is so much more than just an animal that they adopted. To many, pets become permanent additions to the family. While they might not look like a human being or even have the ability to speak the way we do, a lot of owners view their pets as people in their own right. Of course, a person can't be a pet. At least a human person can't, right? Well, not unless you happen to be a part of SCP-1897, otherwise known as the Human Domestication Society. If you've ever been brave enough to travel alone to the rural parts of southwestern states like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Utah, or Nevada, then it's likely you would have been an ideal victim for SCP-1897. This designation doesn't refer to one single creature or entity, but rather a group of similar beings. Witness testimonies and photographs of SCP-1897 depict them as humanoid creatures, standing approximately 5 meters in height. These beings have displayed a speed and strength far beyond that of any human. They are capable of traveling roughly 200 meters in only 9 seconds, and lifting weights of up to 500 kilos with a single hand. These entities are not immortal and can be harmed by conventional means, but that doesn't mean it's an easy task. Any SCP-1897 instance that is killed or incapacitated immediately vanishes, resulting in them dropping anything that they may have been carrying at the time. And surprisingly, these are not mindless monsters, and actually appear to be capable of communication. Furthermore, they do not seem to speak a unique or distinct language, but instead communicate in standard American English, with accents and vernacular appropriate to the regions they appear in. However, they will actively refuse to reply to any human that attempts to engage them in conversation. Now, these creatures don't spend every waking hour of the day roaming around the states of Texas, Oklahoma, and all the others we listed. If they did, it's likely a lot more civilians would have spotted them by now, and would probably live their lives in fear of these gigantic 5-meter-tall humanoids. But instances of SCP-1897 will only manifest if certain specific criteria are met, and these are as follows. To encounter SCP-1897, a person must be alone or part of a group of no more than 2. If more than one person is with them, then no manifestation will occur. There is one exception to the rule: if a child under the age of 12 is present. Secondly, neither the person nor anyone with them can be carrying any kind of weapon. That means no knives, no guns, not even pepper spray. Third and finally, they must be at least 25 meters from a major population center. And what happens when all of these conditions are met and one of these creatures appears? Anyone witnessing their arrival will notice the creatures materializing, appearing to emerge from some form of unseen vehicle. When they manifest, the SCP-1897 entities are almost always carrying long poles with large nets at the end, as well as steel cages, and are often seen wearing dark green uniforms. In most cases, they will attempt to capture any nearby person in a way that causes them the least possible harm. Should an SCP-1897 creature successfully apprehend a person and place them in a cage, both them and their captive will vanish in a similar manner to the way the creature appeared. All attempts to track SCP-1897 or one of its abducted victims have failed. There is no way to know where they are taken, but as far as what happens to them, that we do have a little more insight to. Sometimes, although it is a highly rare occurrence, the captured human victims may reappear around a month after their capture, while never in the same location as where they disappeared from. They will always be accompanied by an SCP-1897 instance and will stay close by the creature's side. At this point, the abductee is barely human anymore. They are considered an instance of what is known as SCP-1897-1. What signifies this sudden and drastic transformation? For one, these victims are always found to have been forcibly castrated or sterilized, essentially no longer able to reproduce the way humans naturally do. For another, these instances of SCP-1897-1 universally display a decreased level of cognitive and mental function. What we mean is that their brains do not function the way they should anymore. Instead, these abductees exhibit the same level of intelligence and capability as the average Canis lupus familiaris, otherwise known as the common domestic dog. Should someone attempt to rescue a person that has become an instance of SCP-1897-1, or display hostility towards the SCP-1897 creature that accompanies them, they will be met with outward animalistic aggression from the victim. It has been discovered by the SCP Foundation that these behaviors can be treated with amnestics. Unfortunately, though, the process of an abducted person becoming an SCP-1897-1 instance seems to be the result of an invasive medical procedure known as a lobotomy. This typically involves removing or disabling certain parts of the human brain, meaning that what has been done to these victims is permanent and cannot be reversed. So who is doing all of this? Why are these creatures collecting innocent human beings only to reduce them to little more than animals? The answers lie in something currently referred to as SCP-1897-2. Not another creature or entity, not an anomalous artifact or location with strange properties, but a website found at the address www.hdsociety.gov. According to the information on this site, it belongs to a group calling themselves the Human Domestication Society. The website features pages such as adoption, training, breeding programs, volunteering, and more. The fact that this is the kind of website you might expect to be about dogs or cats but instead focuses on the domestication of humans is certainly enough to turn the stomach. As we said at the start of the video, surely a human being can't be somebody's pet, right? Wrong. At least as far as the Human Domestication Society goes. Their website contains everything and anything one of these SCP-1897 creatures could ever hope to learn about owning a human as a pet. Has your human been misbehaving? Need to train them to use the toilet? These pages have all the information you need to help your human become the most well-trained human on your block. Boast the training page of www.hdsociety.gov. The remainder of the page contains links to various articles such as obedience training, which claims an owner of a human can show them who's boss without the need for physical violence. Also featured are mentions of how to toilet train or play fetch with a human, how to introduce a human to others due to them naturally not getting along. Perhaps most chilling of all is one article titled Understanding What Your Human Wants, that warns human beings shouldn't talk, and another, Dealing with Strays, offers tips for anyone wanting to learn to capture their own pets themselves. It doesn't seem like too much of a leap to think that the SCP-1897 creatures have followed a lot of the advice from this particular article. Arguably worst of all is an image featured on the website of a tall, menacing SCP-1897 entity brandishing a Picanha Electrica. This device, for any unfamiliar with the term, is a form of high-voltage electrical cattle prod, normally used for the purposes of torture. In the photograph in question, the creature is wielding one of these while standing sternly over a helpless captive human male, now an instance of SCP-1897-1 with tears in his eyes. Further pages found on www.hdsociety.gov recommend solutions to certain human behaviors. For example, like one might expect to find on other pet care websites. Some of the Human Domestication Society's articles pertain to dealing with aggression, grooming, house training, and even toilet training. Then there's the adoption page, which states, "We offer a large variety of humans for adoption every single day. While we cannot guarantee a human you see listed on our website will be available when you reach the shelter, our inventory is updated every half hour. We cannot answer any questions about specific humans pictured on our website over the phone or email." It is still unclear whether or not the SCP-1897 creatures that have been known to appear in the southwestern United States are sent out to gather humans en masse to offer for adoption, or whether these creatures are individuals trying to obtain human pets on their own. Of course, the worst conceivable answer is both. The site is horrifyingly comprehensive, with links to an actual human ownership convention, with panels on breeding and preventing illegal human poaching and skinning. It's safe to say if that you were ever unlucky enough to read this website, it would haunt you for life. Naturally, the SCP Foundation has made several attempts to contact the owners of this website. They tried in vain to communicate through the official channels about SCP-1897-1 adoption, as a way of peacefully negotiating that the Human Domestication Society website be shut down, as well as its practices of capturing, lobotomizing, breeding, and adopting humans. However, these communication attempts were met with silence. That is, until a message was received by the Foundation at Site-06, addressed to a member of personnel that does not exist. No data pertaining to the physical location of the sender could be derived from the email, but it was traced to the same IP address as the Human Domestication Society's website. The email read as follows: "We will not listen to your lies any longer. It was you who came after us first. You who tore holes in our world and tried to annihilate us. You who took our olive branch of peace and fashioned it into a spear. You who nearly drove us to extinction. And now that we have the advantage, you attempt to patronize us with your crocodile tears. We will not be deceived again. But unlike you, we are not monsters. We have much anger towards your kind, but we are willing to forgive. But first you must be willing to change. Slavery and genocide are immoral, and not even you deserve such a fate. It is our belief then that this alternative is a fair compromise between guaranteeing our safety and allowing your kind to live. This is our mercy to you. Look at the humans who have gone through our program. See how much happier they are? Your correspondence tells us that you have seen them. See how much they love us. Why then do you continue to be defiant? Someday you will thank us. Please try to understand that this is for your own good. For now, there is little that the SCP Foundation can do to prevent the Human Domestication Society from abducting human beings to sell as pets to other SCP-1897 creatures. Civilian access to the HDSociety.gov website has been restricted, so we recommend you stop typing into the search bar of your browser to go take a peek. Yes, we mean you. Seriously, stop that. As for the entities that have appeared in the rural areas of the southwestern states, all the Foundation can do is position its agents nearby, in the hopes that they can detain and neutralize the SCP-1897s as they appear, with lethal force if necessary. At present, the only procedure for any human pets that are successfully recaptured is to have them moved safely to containment until a way of rehabilitating them is found. So far, there hasn't been any luck on that front. You're a child, awake at night. What a feeling. In your room, you cling to these rare hours of the evening and watch the hour hand crawl closer towards the parts of the clock you've never seen touched. Now you stare out your window, embracing the moon, the stars, and the darkness that engulfs them. You trace an owl's hoo-hoos up towards the densest evergreen in the neighborhood. You see a rat scurry across the top of a brick wall. You wave to your new nocturnal friends, bonded by the preference of night. Now you open your window and inhale, smelling the dark sky like chocolate cake. You hold it in as long as you can. Very soon, you know, it will all be taken from you. Not by a god or a black hole or any of the universe's hypothesized collapses. At this age, you know nothing of physical cosmology. You know nothing of the Book of Revelation. You're just a child. The forces that give and take from you are not understood through physics nor philosophy, nor through numbers nor thought experiments. Look at you. Your thumb is still pruned from having just kicked the habit of sucking it. Your pajamas are still one unified piece of clothing, cradling your entirety with fuzzy cotton. Your teddy bear is still an extension of your arm, not yet removed by maturity. You're still another 15 years from believing your life is dictated by astrological signs or personal free will or mathematical outputs. It's not that you're ignorant. In fact, you're quite bright as a child. You don't bother to comprehend the forces outside your house because you know as long as you are living inside it, they have no governance. The only true comes from within, from the two gods you have seen with your very own eyes, sitting on the ribbed sofa in gray sweatpants, watching a show about rich people drinking mimosas on boats in the Mediterranean. The almighty parents, rulers of everything. And with just one compound word called up the stairs, they have the power to take everything away from you. Bedtime. And suddenly the curtains are pulled over the world you long for. Now it's not the stars, but the ceiling you're staring at. But thankfully, you are not alone. You pull your teddy bear out from its hibernation beneath your armpit, and you hug him gently, careful not to squeeze out his stuffing. Laying there, you can't help but wonder how your bear got like this, so beaten and bruised, torn up like a dog toy, one eye dangling from a string. His left leg bends forward, impersonating the joint structures of a flamingo. Yet, as far as you know, your best pal has done nothing but sleep. How is he so battered? Can hibernation be that taxing? Do teddy bears expire? The questions for now must be ignored. You lay there together in your bed, fighting the feelings of slumber, almost as if rebelling against mom and dad's tyranny. Thinking deeply only makes you sleepier, and tonight, you insist on staying awake. It's 9:30, and you've yet to be sucked into a dream, and that in itself is a small victory. But your parents' wishes will not be evaded that easily, if ever. They fight back by turning on the air conditioning. The soft rhythmic humming of the white noise weighs on your eyes, and soon you can't resist it any longer. Sleep sneaks up on you. The battle is lost. A safe 10 minutes later, your parents poke their heads into your room and see your body stiff and motionless, wrapped in sheets like a mummy. They celebrate their victory with a quick kiss and go back to the sofa to rest like gods on the 7th day. And while you are sleeping, dreaming of a tomorrow where you don't surrender to the same powers, there is yet another battle to be fought. And if all goes well, you'll sleep right through it. But some children won't be so lucky. On July 7th, 2001, a Portland, Oregon news headline reported a young boy missing from home in the middle of the night. His parents were quick to respond that their son wasn't the type of boy to go wandering out into the dark, and that something suspicious was sure to be discovered there in his bedroom. The first thing noticed was his stuffed animal, a jovial orca torn to shreds, its stuffing scattered across the carpet. Its head and body were stationed in the corner nearest the bed, soaked in a black substance similar to ink, its eyes damp with water. The boy, however, was not to be found. As the parents held their son's dismantled orca in their hands, feeling the weight of mortality, they combed their fingers through the stuffed animal's organs, as if giving it an impromptu autopsy, trying to determine what kind of beast could have done this. But it wasn't justice for the orca they were after. By the time we are old enough to be parents, we've outgrown empathy for our inanimate counterparts. For them, the orca was simply a representation of the cruel fate that may have also been bestowed on their child. Its death was only respected for how it related to the living, and so the poor orca was set aside, forgotten about, until investigators called upon the Foundation to intervene, at which point MTF Iota-12 were dispatched. It revealed that the young boy's room had large trails of viscous black liquid streaking the walls, the very same liquid found on the orca. But where did this liquid come from? Unfortunately, there was no camera footage to give us the answer. Neither were there eyewitness reports or any residual signs of what specifically occurred. Neighbors who were awake reported hearing the thumping from the room, which, as expected, was useless bystander insight, leading to nothing more than a series of rumors and speculations. Maybe it was an extremely localized earthquake. Maybe he was just throwing a temper tantrum. But where does maybe this, maybe that lead us to? Can factual answers ever come from this level of uncertainty? Well, one specific maybe, just may be, the key to cracking this case. Allow me to explain. 2 days after the event, the child was rediscovered, unconscious behind a hedge in the family's garden. A brief interview revealed that the child witnessed the final minutes of what he described as an intense battle. He claimed, "My orca was fighting a big monster, and then the monster grabbed me and took me out the window. But someone saw it, so it dropped me, and I hid in the bush." A second interview revealed no other discoveries, but the child claimed that the monster ate his socks. Initial reactions to the 2 interviews were as expected. Adults reasoned the claims were imaginary, a fabrication of the child's mind manifested to protect himself from whatever the real trauma endured actually was. But heard beneath the skeptical murmurs of jaded grown-ups enslaved by their narrow perceptions was one individual who dared to suggest, maybe, just maybe, the boy is telling the truth. And it was in the spirit of this hopeful and trusting maybe that the Foundation would prove the boy's story to be truth. And the truth would be known as SCP-6330. SCP-6330 is a phenomenon affecting stuffed animals worldwide, though it is most common in teddy bears. Manifestation of this phenomenon is referred to as a sleepwalker event, occurring only within the households of families with young children, typically between the ages of 1 to 14. While you're asleep, vulnerable to what lingers awake, your favorite stuffed animal may find life, impulsively combating enemies referred to as SCP-6330-2. These creatures typically blend with shadows, though this mechanism is poorly understood. They somewhat resemble creatures associated with fantasy, such as dragons or ogres, always manifesting beneath your bed, no matter how messy or clean it might be. SCP-6330-2 instances depict behavior indicating that they intend to hurt or prey upon the sleeping child. And it isn't nightlights or security systems that stop them, but rather SCP-6330-1s. SCP-6330-1 are stuffed animals already present in a child's room that seem to be non-anomalous prior to SCP-6330-2 manifestations. SCP-6330-1 has been shown to instantaneously manifest small wooden weaponry in order to combat SCP-6330-2 to protect their child. Battles have been shown to last upwards of 20 minutes and are always near silent. There is an unspoken agreement between both sides to keep their history concealed as best as they can. In observed cases, SCP-6330-1 have emerged victorious, though are severely wounded during the skirmish. Torn wool and stuffing are common, and following all known events, SCP-6330-1 have died due to their injuries, but only after sacrificing themselves for the safety of the child. Prior to death, the instance will drag the SCP-6330-2's corpse back under the bed frame and demanifest. To understand this, the Foundation has conducted just one test. Given the volatile nature of recreating the events, the Foundation did not push their luck with subsequent studies, and so it's the lone research done in 1987 on Site-44 that they still lean on to this day to understand SCP-6330 and the instances that come with it. It began with a researcher volunteering his 7-year-old daughter, henceforth referred to as Subject, to be placed in a humanoid containment room and soothed to sleep using a teddy bear that she had a strong emotional attachment to. For 12 straight tests, our subject was observed to sleep through the night peacefully, her environment remaining in alignment with the trivialities of deep sleep. But on the 13th study, something would happen. Something very unsettling, even for the Foundation standards. MTF Iota-12 were stationed at the room's entrance for swift intervention if needed, and until that 13th attempt, they felt their focus to be pointless. Approaching the 3rd hour, however, they felt a subtle and unexplained value in their presence. They felt something coming on, that feeling while danger is looming, that feeling that makes you clench your fists just in case. And just as they made eye contact with one another to acknowledge this shared feeling within the group, a quiet rustling sound was heard beneath the bed, and sounds reminiscent of a large animal's breathing became audible. Suddenly, a pair of large, scaly, clawed hands grasped the rim of the bed frame. A creature resembling a western dragon emerged. But was it actually a dragon? Were the sheets ready to be blasted to flames? If slain, would the necks regrow and multiply by the hundreds? These thoughts raced through MTF Iota-12's head. One member instinctually ran for the door to go protect the child, but he was held back and restrained, reminded that the success of the experiment was dependent on letting the situation play out naturally. He was hard to console. Patience at this moment did not feel like a virtue. It felt irresponsible. A creature standing approximately 3 meters above the ground, switching between bipedal and quadrupedal motion, was stalking a sleeping child, and they were instructed to simply watch. For 5 minutes, the SCP-6330-2 patrolled the room, moving silently and methodically, unaware of the surveillance cameras. Then SCP-6330-2 turned towards the subject, positioning itself at the foot of the bed, stretching its arms out towards the subject. It gaped its jaws wide, exposing rows of large pointed teeth and a dark pink tongue. It looked like a snake in a field of mice. As it prepared to lunge at the subject, MTF Iota-12 was ready to intervene. But before they could, the stuffed bear stood up on the subject's chest and drew a small sword and shield from an unknown source, almost magically, like switching weapons in an old Zelda video game. It positioned its sword's tip downward and held its shield at its side. SCP-6330-1 hunched over slightly and twirled its sword, maintaining eye contact with SCP-6330-2 the entire way through. After 10 seconds, the SCP-6330-2 threw its jaws at the subject, and SCP-6330-1 responds with a leap towards the subject's attacker, slicing SCP-6330-2's eye. The SCP-6330-2 responds with a quiet grunt and touches its wound, which leaks a viscous black liquid. The SCP-6330-1 jumps towards SCP-6330-2 and, mid-battle, uses fabric from the bedsheets to quickly stitch the wound, attempting to minimize mess and proof of its presence. Both instances went to battle for 9 minutes before the first signs of damage to SCP-6330-1. Following the severing of one of SCP-6330-2's dorsal spikes, it strikes the SCP-6330-1 with a heavy slap, which sends SCP-6330-1 across the room. It stands back up, placing a hand on its stomach, and looks at its hand, which is now covered in wool and stuffing. They charge at each other once again, but as the subject moves slightly in her sleep, both instances stop and quickly agree on peace until the subject settles. When that happens, the instances resume fighting. Research notes that while the battle is genuine, there is an element of guidance. They do not follow a script, but it appears they follow a code. While both anomalies welcome the conflict brought on by the other, neither wants it broadcasted to the public. After 20 minutes of battle, both instances are heavily scarred and injured. After kicking itself off of the SCP-6330-2's nose, SCP-6330-1 sprints from one side of the room towards SCP-6330-2, leaping into the air and landing a fatal blow, slicing the neck of the other instance, which falls lifeless to the floor. SCP-6330-2 is dragged by the SCP-6330-1 back under the bed. A short while later, the SCP-6330-1 emerges. Damage sustained includes loss of one buttoned eye, exposed stuffing, and torn wool. It places its sword and broken shield on a nearby nightstand. SCP-6330-1 then drags itself up the bedsheets towards the subject, who was sleeping peacefully throughout the test. It rests beside the child lying motionless. It seems to glare directly at the camera, and a small digit protrudes from its round hand, giving a thumbs up to the researchers. Its head flops onto the child's cheek before it ceases to move. The father who risked his daughter for research is pleased with the discoveries regarding both anomalies, but it brings about a new set of questions concerning children and their relationship with the dark. These very thoughts you might even wonder yourself. Maybe a kid's desire to stay up past bedtime isn't so much about wanting to watch cartoons with curse words or read Calvin and Hobbes. Maybe it's not about a desire to be awake at all, but rather a subconscious fear of being asleep. Maybe our senses as children are heightened to the anomalies that creep about. Maybe all the fabled fears of children aren't fairy tales after all. And maybe mom and dad checking under our bed is just performance parenting. Because even if something were there, would they even be able to see it? Or is everything beyond an adult's understanding misattributed to the imagination? As we age, does our perception of how reality should look alter the reality that is actually there? Do we indeed see clearer with our expensive glasses from our high-rise office space? Or did we see more accurately in the glow of our action figure nightlight, spying through stitches in our blankets, looking past crusty eye boogers at what moved in the shadows? It is hard to ever know. For every real encounter a child has with an SCP-6330, there might be hundreds of falsehoods. The ratio is truly impossible to calculate. But as long as teddy bears are universal, so too are their anomalous enemies. And so where does that fact leave us? How do we go forward? Should we be afraid to put our children to sleep? Afraid of the monsters under their bed? I don't think that's what our hero would want. Sometimes we have to learn to trust things, even if we don't understand them. Like gravity or multiplication. We have to trust that the relationship between children and their stuffed animals are in fact real. We have to learn their loyalty is reciprocated, even if the adult world has taught us otherwise. And if we ever need a reminder of these lessons, we can look to Event 184 in Cambridge, England, where we have our first recording of a sleepwalker event outside of controlled testing, and also our first piece of evidence proving SCP-6330-1 to understand language and how to use it to connect with humans in ways beyond being cute and cuddly. On November 11, 2008, a call was filed to local authorities by a family who claimed to have discovered footage of a sleepwalker event within their son's room. Mobile Task Force Iota-12 lucid dreamers were dispatched to investigate. Immediately, the footage was seized by personnel, and all members of the family were administered Class A amnestics. The child's bed swayed lightly as an instance of SCP-6330-2 emerges. The instance resembles an unknown creature, though it is described as having a large muscular frame. The instance walks to the opposite end of the room, hunching over and observing the child for exactly 10 minutes. As the SCP-6330-2 begins to stand further upright, it extends a retractable set of claws. Then, the child's teddy bear suddenly stands, drawing a bow and quiver. SCP-6330-2 assumes a quadrupedal stance and snarls before lunging towards the bed. The SCP-6330-1 fires a single arrow towards the SCP-6330-2, striking the instance directly in its canine-like snout. SCP-6330-2 responds with a loud huff, reminiscent of that of a bull or bovine. The instances battle for approximately 30 minutes, the longest recorded sleepwalker event to date. Both show abilities and skill sets consistent with other SCP-6330-1 and -2 instances. Eventually, SCP-6330-2 has SCP-6330-1 pinned to a nearby wall and tries to strangle it. The SCP-6330-2 then pulls one of SCP-6330-1's arrows from its arm, plunging it into the -1's chest. Then the -2 leans its head towards the -1 and whispers into the instance's right ear, though audio recordings cannot determine exactly what was vocalized. The SCP-6330-1 lifts up its head, staring blankly into SCP-6330-2's eyes. It reaches behind its back, pulling out a small, entirely wooden Glock 19 handgun. The bear points the weapon into SCP-6330-2's forehead and fires. The shot is silent, and the SCP-6330-2's body falls limp. Black viscous fluid sprays onto the wall. The SCP-6330-1 hauls SCP-6330-2's corpse towards the bed, noticeably limping. It drags the body by its large forearm and demanifests upon reaching the underneath of the bed. SCP-6330-1 returns and briefly stares around the room before turning to the child. It climbs up a desk and finds a piece of paper and a pen. It goes on to write the following note. Hello, Timothy. Thank you for always taking care of me. It really was fun. I was able to repay the favor of protecting you. Unfortunately, I am hurt. I need to go. I'm too weak to stay, and I just hope you'll remember me. It's been fun helping you. I've enjoyed my time under your care. Going into this, I knew it would happen. The Sleepwalker's coming for you. I'm just happy I could do my job. Goodbye, my friend. I hope I may see you soon. Who doesn't love dogs? They're friendly, energetic, and can be beneficial to their owner's happiness and mental health. On top of all those positive qualities, most dogs are fiercely loyal to their masters. You'll often hear stories of dogs defending their owners or even staying by their side through their very last days, and even sticking next to them beyond death. As sad as that thought might be to many dog owners, it provides us the perfect context for today's topic. It's about time you met SCP-1111, sometimes also known by the nickname the White Dog. This moniker actually refers to one of the two halves of SCP-1111, namely the former, SCP-1111-1, while its counterpart is simply known only as SCP-1111-2. As you may have already deduced, SCP-1111-1 is, or at least appears to be, a fairly common domesticated dog. Sporting white fur that gives it its nickname, the White Dog is a cross between two different popular breeds, the German Shepherd and the Labrador Retriever. However, upon closer inspection, this particular pup is a far cry from one you might see fetching sticks or chasing squirrels at the park. For one, this dog never eats or drinks. Under normal circumstances, that would be worrying behavior in any dog, but in SCP-1111-1's case, it comes second to the fact that this dog is partially see-through. Now that's definitely not normal. In actual fact, this pooch is pretty far from ordinary. It seems to be at least semi-translucent, not quite as much as we usually picture a ghost or hologram, but also not fully visible like a living being. In fact, how clearly visible the White Dog is can vary depending on how close it is to 1111-2. Any further than 500 meters away and the dog will gradually grow more and more transparent, but not fully invisible. But visibility isn't the only thing that shifts with 1111-1's distance from its other half. The size of the dog also changes. It remains standing at 150 centimeters when directly beneath 1111-2. and gradually gets smaller the further and further away from 1111-2 it gets. Finally, there's its eyes. SCP-1111-1 possesses a distinct pair of glowing red eyes, the brightness and intensity of which increase the closer it is to 1111-2. So let's recap. So far, we have a strange white dog with glowing eyes that changes size and becomes more or less visible the further it gets from a secondary element. But if the white dog is SCP-1111-1, then what forms this second part of SCP-1111? Well, if you were to look close enough at the white dog, you'd notice the red collar that it wears around its neck. And hanging from that collar is a tag, on which is printed one single word: loyal. It's certainly a fitting word to describe 1111-1. Why? Because SCP-1111-2 is presumably the dog's master, or rather, its master's dead body. Dressed in an old, worn business suit and formal dress shoes, SCP-1111-2 appears to be a deceased male of indeterminate age. The precise identity of this man has proven next to impossible for Foundation researchers to determine. The condition of his suit and shoes have deteriorated so much that it has been difficult to even identify the original company that produced the clothing worn by the corpse. As for his cause of death, well, that unfortunately seems all too obvious, given that the 1111-2 body always appears the same way, hanging from a tree with a noose around his neck. Foundation staff observed the two parts that make up SCP-1111 have noted that 1111-2 will occasionally make quick, violent twitching movements. These random jerks and spasms of the corpse are consistent with those exhibited by a person who is dying from asphyxiation, and often researchers have heard the body making desperate gasps for air. The closer his white furried canine counterpart is, the more frequent and violent these motions and sounds will become. It's almost as if SCP-1111-2 has somehow been trapped on the very brink of death, reliving those final moments over and over again, all while guarded by his loyal white dog. If left alone and not interfered with, the white dog will lie down just beneath where its master's body is hanging. The dog never sleeps, nor does it require any food or water, and does not even seem to breathe. And as long as Foundation research staff keep their distance, both parts of SCP-1111 seem content to remain in a docile state. To keep them contained, the SCP Foundation has established a 2-kilometer safe zone around SCP-1111, keeping them monitored through cameras attached to weather balloons. The restricted enclosure is, according to a public cover story, a weather monitoring station, hence the balloons. No member of Foundation staff is permitted anywhere within a kilometer of SCP-1111, unless they are given express permission from a superior member of the Foundation. Should SCP-1111-1 ever stray away from the tree where its master hangs though, then the area must be evacuated of all personnel until the dog returns to its normal position. However, Foundation staff are urged to be wary when approaching SCP-1111, because the white dog may well be more ferociously loyal than any pet. Emphasis on ferocious. The moment that 1111-1 becomes aware of anything coming towards itself and its owner's body, the dog will become viciously hostile. Regardless of the person or object coming towards it, the semi-corporeal canine will attempt to attack and destroy the intruder. In this state, the white dog exhibits even more dramatic physiological differences from a normal domesticated dog. Video footage recorded by the SCP Foundation shows that the dog is capable of reaching incredible speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour, which is, of course, considerably faster than an average canine. The white dog can also reach a height of 6 meters when jumping up into the air, and has teeth and a bite strength powerful enough to tear through armor plating composed of 15mm thick titanium. Given the entity's speed, aggression, and translucent qualities, any attempts by the SCP Foundation to neutralize the white dog or even capture it for closer examination have ended the same grisly way for the staff members who tried. The creature's fierce loyalty defending its owner's body also make it incredibly difficult for Foundation staff to even get close enough to SCP-1111-2 to properly study the remains. As we said before, that loyal tag around the dog's neck is certainly an accurate description. On a date which has been redacted from its file, an incident occurred involving SCP-1111 and a team that consisted of a number of Foundation agents. This team had been ordered to neutralize the white dog and transport the anomalous animal to a containment facility. Attempting to evade the creature's direct line of sight, the agents approached the hanging body of SCP-1111-2 from the north, the opposite direction to the way the dog was facing. Possessing a sense of hearing and smell far beyond that of a human being, the white dog was able to quickly detect the agents approaching its master. When the team got within 300 meters of the tree where the body was hanging, the canine set upon them, tearing at clothing and shredding protective armor with its teeth in order to get to the agent's soft flesh underneath. One of these agents fled, running as fast as they could from the area. But of course, this was a futile move, as the white dog quickly noticed and began to pursue the Foundation agent with its superpowered speed. As it chased them, the surveillance cameras recorded SCP-1111-1 decreasing in size, becoming harder to see with the naked eye the further it ran from the tree. The dog's speed began to decline too. The further the dog got from the tree with the noose, the less the body hanging from it seemed to be spasming too. When the white dog had reached 900 meters from SCP-1111-2, the corpse was seen to stop moving entirely, frozen and stiff as one would normally expect a deceased body to be. Realizing how far away it was from its master, SCP-1111-1 froze. Appearing unsure for a moment, it turned to look towards the body of its master, perhaps sensing that the random jerks and post-mortem movements had stopped. At this point, the dog howled and sprinted back towards the tree, causing the corpse of its owner to begin twitching yet again. Footage of this incident showed that the white dog was impervious to conventional weapons, and any rounds fired at the canine by Foundation agents merely passed through its ghostly body. However, its claws and teeth were very much solid, and it was able to slaughter almost all the agents, save for the one who fled, who ended up being the sole survivor of the encounter. Following this disastrous mission, the O5 Council issued an order that, in order to protect the lives of Foundation personnel, only remote-controlled drones and expendable D-Class personnel would be permitted anywhere near SCP-1111. Shortly after the previous incident, a group of D-Class were sent into the area around the tree where SCP-1111-2 was hanging, this time approaching from multiple directions at once. But this only led to the same results, as the White Dog began to quickly move between each of the D-Classes, killing them one after another. Only one, D-83011, was able to make it close enough to the corpse to make any noteworthy observations. As they approached, the hanging corpse of SCP-1111-2 seemed to slow its jerks and twitches, and the body did something that had never been seen before. It opened its eyes. It raised its arms towards the approaching D-Class in what looked like a welcoming hug, only for D-83011 to be torn to shreds by the White Dog moments after. Cameras nearby picked up more previously unseen movement, namely the owner's mouth moving almost as if he was saying the words, "No, down boy." But soon after, the corpse fell limp again and resumed its normal twitches. Following this, the Foundation have theorized that the White Dog could possibly be contained by somehow removing its master's body from the area. Some staff have also noted that SCP-1111 shares certain traits with SCP-023, a similar anomalous creature also referred to as the Black Shuck. Much like the White Dog, the Shuck also possesses a ghostly canine form, and appears to be the same large dog-like creature that is referenced in ancient folklore from throughout the British Isles. According to legend, the Shuck appears to travelers at crossroads, serving as an omen of bad luck, impending disaster, and is even thought to be one of the Hounds of Hell itself. SCP-023, like SCP-1111, also has anomalous abilities that focus on geographic space. In the Black Shuck's case, anyone it detects approaching it will die or lose a member of their family within a year. Researchers working for the Foundation believe that SCP-023 and SCP-1111-1 could be related, or even instances of the same phenomenon, a sort of dog yin and yang. But since they have still, as of yet, been unable to capture the White Dog, it has been impossible to verify this. The SCP Foundation will no doubt keep trying though. While testing may have been suspended for the time being, they always know where to find SCP-1111-1, beneath its master's hanging body, guarding it for all eternity. So here's a statement that won't blow anyone's mind. The SCP Foundation is really weird. And we're not even talking about the actual anomalies they contain. Sure, this top-secret organization puts in the time and the effort to make sure menaces to society like the hard-to-destroy reptile, the Scarlet King, and even the horrifying bad joke tomatoes stay behind lock and key. But sometimes you need to hold the mirror up to yourself and see just what the heck is going on. I mean, seriously, think about it. This is an organization that uses live human beings farmed from death row as test subjects. Considering how rarely the death penalty is actually employed in the Western world these days, you know some shady strings are being pulled there. And what about the O5 Council, the leaders of humanity's last line of defense against anomalous chaos? And according to some accounts, they're a group of vain, petty, and morally bankrupt individuals who regularly use anomalies like SCP-006, the Fountain of Youth, for their own personal benefit. And don't even get me started on the actual scientists working under the Foundation's payroll. That's when things start getting even stranger. Of course, there's Dr. Jack Bright, a man forever changed by the chance interaction with SCP-963, an anomalous medallion, and one of Abel's deadly blades. Now he's an immortal weirdo who's equal parts brilliant and a total nuisance, so much so that there's an entire dedicated list forbidding all of his zanier antics. Then there's Dr. Alto Clef. Don't even try to shake his hand given how much this ex-GOC wildcard loves using violence to solve his problems. You may draw back a stump. He specializes in reality warping anomalies, often wields a ukulele cause he's just so darn quirky. Oh, and he's very likely the baby daddy to a teenage nature sprite after a dalliance with a goddess. Or, what about Dr. Charles Ogden Gears? Sure, he may not look that strange to the naked eye. He's a man so dull and humorous that gray is his favorite color, and he thinks sugar on cornflakes is an act of unacceptable decadence. But he's got a whole lot of strangeness under the hood. like the fact he's such an emotionally unavailable father that his daughters across dimensions have formed a splinter cell of the Serpent's Hand, where they work under the collective pseudonym The Black Queen, just to spite him. Dr. Dan, through acts of sabotage, was personally responsible for the worst SCP-096 outbreak in Foundation history, leading to the end of thousands of lives, just so he could receive clearance to terminate the creature. And he got that clearance, on the condition that the SCP Foundation would be terminating him for his crimes as soon as the goal is achieved. And then there's... Oh my gosh. Did someone dress a dog up in scientist clothes? Oh my god, that's the cutest thing I've ever seen. Oh, this is just brightened my day. Okay, maybe I was being too harsh on the Foundation before. Whose dog is this?
Excuse me, sir, that is extremely inappropriate.
Wait, you can talk?
Of course I can talk, you dolt! I'm Professor Kane Pathos Crow, one of the SCP Foundation's finest minds in the field of advanced robotics and biochemistry. I have a level 4 clearance for 343's sake. I'm not some common bloody mutt.
Oh, my apologies, Professor Crow. I wasn't aware you were a, well, a talking dog.
Well, yes, I imagine there's a lot you don't know about me, isn't there?
I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but, that's true, Professor Crow. Our data on you and your work with the SCP Foundation is a little sparse.
Here, take these files. These should give you a good primer.
Okay, I suppose we better take this from the top then. Professor Kane Pathos Crow, among a lineup of extremely eccentric researchers, somehow manages to rise to the very top in terms of sheer strangeness. To get the most obvious fact out of the way, yes, while he was once a human, an anomalous experiment did result in him being turned into a Labrador Retriever. How did this happen, you may ask? We have the same question. Sadly, Professor Crow is incredibly reluctant to share any details about this strange and embarrassing incident, so we're just gonna have to accept it for what it is and move on. Everyone ready? Okay, good. Despite his strange appearance, Professor Crow is actually one of the more scientifically qualified of the Foundation researchers. It's no surprise that, because of this, he has a relatively close working relationship with Dr. Gears, so much so that he still refers to Gears by his early Foundation codename, Cog, a reference to both the legendary Stern Doctor's initials and a pun on his iconic surname. During one incident, Dr. Gears did tell Professor Crow to terminate an anomaly that was, for all intents and purposes, a human child, if it presented any difficulties. This sours the wholesomeness of that previous fact, so we'll swiftly move on. Once again, Dr. Gears is just terrible with kids. Like a lot of Foundation researchers, Professor Crow was personally headhunted by the SCP Foundation after his academic work in the fields of advanced robotics and biochemistry started turning heads. This was, just for clarity's sake, back before Professor Crow was turned into a Labrador. Professor Crow spends most of his time working in Bioresearch Area 12, where he studies a variety of anomalies. But his bookish nature also earned him another interesting position. He's the SCP Foundation's chief librarian, where his encyclopedic knowledge of anomalous technical literature has made him a valuable asset in archiving and organization. This balances out some of Professor Crow's indiscretions. It is important to specify that Professor Crow is genuinely a well-liked figure among his SCP Foundation coworkers. After all, who wouldn't love to work with an adorable dog in a lab coat and glasses all day? But it's also important to note that he is also somewhat mistake-prone, with a number of these mistakes putting him in the crosshairs of his superiors. Professor Crow has come close to outright termination several times, perhaps the most out of any prominent researcher currently working at the Foundation. However, to keep himself out of the same dead man walking category that the thoroughly unpleasant Dr. Dan currently finds himself in, Professor Crow has a few aces up his sleeve. Firstly, he's got friends in the administrative department willing to pull a few strings to keep him out of harm's way. Hey, maybe they're just very ardent dog lovers up there. The other thing that's kept him from being turned into an extremely overqualified chew toy for SCP-682 is the contents of his brilliant brain. On many of the occasions where the O5 Council have considered terminating him, he's demonstrated the fact he possesses vital and often irreplaceable knowledge, saving his furry skin. A perfect example of the kinds of strange scrapes that Professor Crow gets himself into is the incident in 2009, where, without even realizing it, he somehow traveled through time and scared the living daylights out of everyone. The details are best expressed here in Professor Crow's own dictated notes. 1802-2009. In all my years working here, there have been few things which have irritated me.
Cause me physical harm? Yes. Cause me undue stress? Yes. Cause me innumerable amount of mental distress? Yes. But few things have just irritated me. Time travel is one of them. I went to bed on the 15th of January, year 2009 at 1:30 a.m. I woke up on February 18th at 9:26 a.m. of the same year. I hadn't moved, I had only 9 hours of sleep, and to me, nothing had happened. Then, after a slightly confused day amidst the many cries of, "I thought you were dead," among other things I might add, I discovered that I have been missing for the past month and 3 days. In that time, Sophia had completely taken over my duties, though she had halted all of my personal experiments and was trying her utmost to relocate me, while keeping my disappearance from the higher-ups. Apparently,
Data expunged.
leaving me to sleep in a small self-contained bubble of
Data expunged.
and making at least
Data expunged.
which was eventually ruptured by
Data expunged.
and sending me back to this phase of space and time. Needless to say, I was slightly irritated, to say the least. 24/02/2009. Bah. They've had me in quarantine for nearly the past week, observing me and running tests to see if they can find any sort of strange abnormalities with my physiology, my behavior, my anything. If I had one more hand shoved up my nether regions, or I'm forced to look at one more bloody ink blot, I'm going to flip out and go rabid. They'll say they'll stop the quarantine soon, and Sophia says the higher-ups still haven't caught on to anything. And I suppose I'm lucky in that count. Normally, the only time they quarantine something is when it's too dead to be any sort of immediate security hazard. Still, I guess I can see where they're coming from. If it were my decision, I'd probably force a quarantine too, and probably for longer. At least they had the decency to give me my clothes, my PDA, and someone to dictate to. 12/03/2009. I'm still here, and I hate it. Day in, day out, it's the same thing. Get up, eat, exercise, then simple observation until lunch, then more observation until dinner, then lights out. I'm not allowed anything other than the things I already have, and even then, I only got those because Sophia felt bad for me. I'm only allowed to use them every day for an hour at most. Otherwise, they're also in observational storage. All this wasted time that I could have been doing something constructive, something useful, something interesting, but no. I'm stuck here because of a wry twist of fate, forcing me into this monotonous hell. They keep telling me I'll be let out soon. Liars. 05/05/2009. They've seen fit to release me. I almost thought I was going to die in there. Still, it almost seems strange to be out and about again, but I do appreciate being back in my own quarters, my own clothes, and my beloved walker back by my side. Sophia has taken good care of the facility while I was gone. I think I might actually leave that to her, while I keep to my experiments. She seems to enjoy it a great deal. Suits her analytical mind. All of my personal experiments are still waiting for me, with the exception of the 040 test logs. They simply haven't posted their findings yet, stating that they needed my approval first. So I'll have to pore through those the first chance I get. I'm interested in the progress she may have made. Still, there is a good deal of work to be done, and I am more than ready enough to take it on. After all, I have to make up for lost time, don't I? It's clear that life isn't easy for poor Professor Crow. Much like Dr. Bright after experiencing the mysterious event that turned him into a dog, Professor Crow is both a researcher and an anomaly. And unlike the superficially subtle presentation of Dr. Bright's anomalous nature, it's hard to hide the strangeness of a talking dog in human clothes. This bizarre interstitial zone he occupies forces the Foundation to keep him on an extremely short leash. No pun intended. Seriously, Professor, it wasn't intended, I swear. Anyway, the point is Professor Crow isn't allowed to clock off at the end of the workday like his fellow researchers do. He's forced to remain on site, almost never appearing in public. If the professor wasn't the kind of person who could easily get lost in his work, a situation like this would probably drive him insane. Speaking of, you're probably wondering by this point, other than being the cutest researcher at the Foundation, sorry, Dr. Clef, you're special in your own way, we promise. What kind of work is Professor Kane Pathos Crow actually known for around here? Professor Crow's most notable body of work is largely based on an opinion that's pretty controversial to hold around the SCP Foundation. He believes that they should be actively utilizing anomalies that aren't dangerous in order to further their collective goals. An excellent example of this is the cordial relationship he has with SCP-040, also known as Evolution's Child. She's a powerful reality warper who is able to synthesize new anomalous life from pre-existing living creatures. Professor Crow, who refers to her as Emma in his personal writings, was initially training her to do this with SCP-148.
the infamous Telekill alloy. However, he also filed a formal request to go further, saying, "I think it's about time we started trying to utilize 040's abilities, or at the very least allowing her to use them enough to actually learn how to control them. She will not be able to rely on the SCP-148 hairpieces forever. We theorize that as she gets older, her powers will increase exponentially, possibly to the point where her unconscious telepathy cannot be contained." He also somewhat infamously went ham with a series of experiments using SCP-158, a frightening anomalous device known as the Soul Extractor, which, contrary to its name, Professor Crow also realized could place removed souls into other objects or creatures. This led to the creation of a being that Crow dubbed Zero, because it was Subject Zero in his experiments to create a composite soul using SCP-158. He spoke of this subject, somewhat creepily, in his notes. "Zero would make an excellent candidate for my assistant. It respects and admires me for its creation much as a child would an endearing father figure. I have assured it that it would be treated well, and that I would give it a host to the best of my ability to create. All that it asks of me is that it be given a name other than Zero. A name, not a number. I told it to give itself a name, to christen itself whatever it so wishes. It told me it would have to think about it." Like a lot of strange and fascinating figures, everything you learn about Professor Kane Pathos Crow seems to raise new questions. Is Crow just a mad scientist without a cause, eager to perform bizarre experiments for their own sake? Well, not quite. The sum total of all of Professor Crow's work is Project Olympia, a topic that probably deserves a whole video in its own right. And do sound off in the comments if you'd like to hear more about the deranged Frankenstein project that Professor Crow has devoted his life to. You see, Project Olympia is Crow's baby, and also his attempt to play God. Through combining a variety of different anomalies, including all the ones we've mentioned here, and several others, he would hope to create an entirely artificial living thing that would serve the interests of the SCP Foundation. How exactly this would be beneficial to the SCP Foundation is, admittedly, a little confusing, but seeing this goal through to its conclusion has become an all-consuming obsession for Professor Crow. He's performed countless experiments with a huge catalog of anomalies under the Project Olympia umbrella. He's written reams upon reams of notes and logs on the subject, and produced a huge number of prototypes. He's also used Project Olympia as a pretense to remove even more souls using SCP-158, because that just appears to be a strange obsession of his, doesn't it? Incidentally, we aren't the only ones confused about the exact purpose and value of Project Olympia. When members of the O5 Council finally got a proper look at Professor Crow's work with the project, they released the following statement. "All activity related to Project Olympia has been discontinued. Overwatch Command has deemed it to be a gross waste of resources and permanently removed support for the project, with personnel assigned to work with it being moved to alternative sites. A hearing is to be held with the project administrators to determine how the project was able to continue as long as it did, despite the lack of any concrete results. Prototypes and other equipment have been slated to be decommissioned." Professor Crow took this news about as well as you could expect, but in the end, he always finds a way to wriggle out and continue doing whatever he wants to do. Because that's what Professor Kane Pathos Crow is all about. He's living proof that sometimes you just can't keep a good dog down.
To paraphrase noted scientist Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz,
If I had a nickel for every time there was a safe class anomaly that manifests an absurdly long entity that's stuck underground and pops up at multiple points around the world, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice.
Incidentally, that happens to be the case with SCP-1193, the Buried Giant, and SCP-2952, Corgi. They're a pair of mysterious creatures with very thought-provoking similarities between them. But while both are exceedingly long entities, neither are particularly long stories. So today, we're giving you a rare SCP-explained anomaly double feature. Let's begin with the first of our 2 very long boys, SCP-1193. The exact nature of SCP-1193's anomalous qualities are challenging to define. It appears to have biological, spatial, and even temporal elements. SCP-1193-01, the primary component of SCP-1193, is a human arm that appears completely normal in a genetic sense, but exhibits a freakish length and bone structure. This absurdly long arm was first discovered in a drainage pipe inside the basement of a telephone switching station in Scottsdale, Arizona, where it had somehow become trapped. How this anomaly was first discovered, or by whom, is not recorded. Approximately 10 centimeters below the drainage gate of the pipe,
The arm terminates in what seems to be a human hand of indeterminate gender that is unremarkable in both size and structure. Upon initial examination, the Foundation believed that the arm somehow threaded through 35 meters of drainage pipe. But the use of an endoscopic camera within the pipe revealed that the reality is much more severe. The arm extends to at least 71 kilometers beneath the earth, which is around double the overall length of Scottsdale, Arizona itself, with elbows regularly spaced across every 4 kilometers of arm. Elbows below a depth of 26 kilometers are slightly retroflexed to accommodate a 9 degrees southward bend in the drainage borehole. Interestingly, the arm was also somehow able to pass through the Mohorovich discontinuity, which is the lower limit of the Earth's crust and the volcanic hot upper mantle. The arm could actually be longer than what we're currently aware, but the Foundation doesn't have any technology hardy enough to follow the arm all the way down into the Earth. Conversations that Foundation staff have had with what is believed to be SCP-1193-01 via the use of SCP-1193-02 indicates that the entity may have no thermoreception. It has described itself as being stuck in environments that contextually should have either extremely high or extremely low temperatures. This does not seem to register with SCP-1193-01. This may serve as an explanation as to why it is experiencing no discomfort, despite the borehole temperatures having been measured in excess of 674 degrees centigrade. But what exactly is SCP-1193-02? SCP-1193-02 is a GPO-746 rotary telephone with a topaz yellow plastic exterior manufactured in 1971. Because of the physical dimensions of the phone, it is too large to have been delivered from below via the borehole, so we know that SCP-1193-01 didn't put it there. The working theory of Foundation researchers assigned to the 1193 case is that the phone was installed here specifically to facilitate communications with the trapped SCP-1193-01. It is attached to a conventional twisted pair line, which enters the drainage pipe containing SCP-1193-01. and descends parallel to SCP-1193-01 until endoscopy is no longer practical. Who or what installed the phone? How? And to what end beyond just chatting with the entity? The Foundation doesn't presently know, and the investigation is ongoing. One clue to the purpose of SCP-1193-02 is the fact that its rotary dial has been permanently glued in place, rendering it unusable for any kind of outgoing calls. Instead, the phone only receives calls, and the only calls it seems to receive are from a being that seems to be SCP-1193-01. Every weekday between 8:32 a.m. and 10:34 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, the phone will ring up to 5 times. When answered by a member of Foundation personnel, an unidentified voice believed to be that of SCP-1193-01 will willingly engage in conversation with the person on the other end of the line. The Foundation has used this opportunity to question SCP-1193-01 about its own nature, but it's impossible to really know how reliable the entity's answers are. The voice on the line always refers to itself as a human being, and often mistakes the Foundation personnel for authority figures such as doctors, firemen, or police. As a result of this, the voice has been forthcoming with information, and the interviews have been relatively straightforward. There have been notable similarities between the information that the voice voluntarily gives about itself and the known facts about the condition of SCP-1193-01, lending credibility to the idea that they are one and the same. The Foundation fastidiously records conversations with the voice and has created a list of anomalous details the entity has surrendered during the phone calls. These include having human features, but an anomalous body plan. So the voice seems to have all the right pieces for a human being, but in a bizarre configuration. This may explain the extremely long, many-jointed arm. Whatever species or subspecies this entity is, it may not be alone, as the voice often refers to a cousin or some kind of other relative who's on the way to pick it up. The voice often talks about its feelings of discomfort or boredom at its state of being confined. It also makes reference to strange seismic activity along the Little Chino Fault Complex, an upper branch of the Elsinore Fault Zone of Southern California, over 300 miles away from Arizona. This may be because the source of the voice is so far underground, it's still able to feel the tremors resonating upwards. But one of the most frequent trends of all in these conversations is that the voice venting frustration that its arm, or some other body part, is stuck in an inconvenient place. This list of places has been exhaustive, but includes handcuffs, a jelly jar, a pipe, a cast, or in one instance, a gopher hole. Naturally, this has been seen as a cause for concern among Foundation staff. If SCP-1193 does have spatially anomalous components, is it possible that someone could find a 70-kilometer arm sticking out of a gopher hole or a jelly jar sometime soon? Only time will tell. The Foundation currently regards any information about the physical form of the entity beyond the exposed section of the arm reached via endoscopy as provisional. In other words, they really have no idea what they're dealing with here, and are unlikely to find out for sure anytime soon. 2 phone conversations with the voice via SCP-1193-02 have been transcribed in the addendum to 1193's main file. Both are conversations between the voice and Dr. Hassan Iqbal, Director of Research at the local SCP containment site. In the first of 2 conversations, recorded on March 24, 2008, Dr. Iqbal asked who was calling, and the voice identified itself as David. The voice, or David, appeared to be in its usual state of frustration and distress, incorrectly believing that Dr. Iqbal was a medical doctor at the hospital he was currently trapped inside. David implored him to remove the cast from his bottom arm. When Dr. Iqbal questioned David on what exactly a bottom arm is, he responded with confusion. When Dr. Iqbal told him that he was a research scientist, not a medical doctor, David became frustrated, implied that Dr. Iqbal was incompetent, and hung up. The next recorded call between Dr. Iqbal and the voice occurred exactly a year later. In this call, the voice incorrectly believed that Dr. Iqbal was a fireman. The voice complained about having reached into its oven to pull out some cakes, becoming stuck in the process. He pleaded for help, saying that the oven was a tight fit. When Dr. Iqbal showed concern about the potentially high temperatures within the oven, the voice didn't seem to know what he meant. In the end, the voice became frustrated and resolved to instead call its cousin. It apologized and hung up. Most calls appear to follow this general structure. Because of the static and incredibly subdued nature of the anomaly, the Foundation has deemed that SCP-1193 poses no meaningful risk of containment breach. As a result, it has been given the rare safe classification. In order to keep it properly contained, the drainage borehole containing SCP-1193-01 is capped with a tungsten steel grate containing a locking 2.5 cm endoscopy aperture, meaning a small hole through which to feed the endoscopic camera. Every 48 hours, the drainage borehole is inspected with an endoscope for any further developments concerning the anomalous arm. Seismographic monitoring devices are posted at 2, 7, and 11 kilometer depths alongside the SCP-1193-01 borehole. Seismic readings consistent with a subterranean movement are reported immediately to Site Director Iqbal. In the event of what is referred to as subterranean containment breach, researchers and guards working around 1193 are ordered to perform Protocol 473-A. This involves severing SCP-1193 below the 5th elbow and backfilling remaining portions of the borehole with pressurized concrete to seal the hole forever. The SCP-1193-02 phone is monitored at all times by a trained Foundation interrogator, and standard procedure dictates that SCP-1193-02 is to be answered on or before the 3rd ring. During these calls, the interrogator will attempt to elicit valuable information about SCP-1193 from the voice, and all valuable intel will then be recorded and logged. The Buried Giant is one of the more perplexing safe-class anomalies handled by the SCP Foundation. So much about its true nature is unknown to this day, but a concern that both we and the Foundation share is not knowing where the entity's other limbs are currently residing. For all we know, they could be sticking out of an oven, a gopher hole, or even a jelly jar somewhere near you. Weird, right? Well, if you think that's strange, let us now introduce you to SCP-2952, or Corgi. Trust us, if you're not familiar with this one already, you are not ready for the strange turns this is about to take. In the simplest terms, Corgi is a cheerful Welsh Pembroke Corgi with an adorable face and a thick, shiny coat. He's also over 30,000 kilometers in length, with his head and front legs sticking out of the ground in Portland, Oregon, and his hindquarters being all the way over in a rural area of Japan's Katawa district. His body weaves all across the globe, with sections of it surfacing all over the Americas, Europe, and much of Asia. Studies to find African or Australian sections of SCP-2952 are still ongoing. Despite its massive length, there seems to be no delay in reaction times either. You pat his head in the USA and his tail will immediately start wagging over in Japan. He's honestly just precious. He also doesn't appear to need food or water, and thanks to the somewhat sadistic experiments of one researcher Mills, we know that he can quickly regenerate from all damage done to him too. Okay, now you're familiar with this very good, albeit very long lad. It's time for things to get really strange. You see, on the different exposed section of SCP-2952's body, there are tiny openings designated SCP-2952-1. Stay with us here. There are 324 openings all over the world, some in major cities, others in suburban areas, some in the tiniest and most rural of hamlets. At this point, you probably have the very reasonable question, why are there over 300 openings in this dog? Well, we're going to answer that, but we can't promise it won't just give you more confusing questions. When the openings appear, humanoid beings designated SCP-2952-2 will begin to exit the Corgi. For the sake of clarity, we'll refer to these little creatures as the Welsh Fair Folk, or the Fae, though there are many different subgroups of Fae, and we really do mean little in this case. On average, they're a puny 3 centimeters tall, and they're also invisible to the naked eye, with indirect methods like photographs or videos being the only way to view them. Though they do leave evidence of their presence beyond their direct physical appearances, like shadows or footprints. Corgi acts as a kind of transport system for these little people. Openings on the dexterous side of SCP-2952 take passengers west, while those on the sinistrous side take passengers east. Passengers can be seen entering and exiting at regular intervals. The Foundation has even been able to track a group of passengers getting on the Corgi transit system and getting off at a later stop. From this, the Foundation has been able to estimate that the speed of the system is 120 kilometers per hour, excluding stops to let passengers on and off along the way, which, for the record, is a pretty leisurely pace by train standards. Naturally, the SCP Foundation weren't exactly thrilled to learn about an anomalous transit system that worked to spread further anomalies all over the world. In fact, that's kind of a nightmare scenario for them. So they marshaled their global forces, located each of the openings along the torso of the Corgi system, and blocked them up. At this point, the SCP Foundation were ready to give themselves a pat on the back, close up shop for the night, and go out for after-work drinks. However, there was one thing that they'd all forgotten. Hell hath no fury like a society of Welsh Fae who've just had their daily commute ruined. The Council of Tywydd Teg, their ruling body, doesn't take kindly to having their public services messed with, and the manner of their retaliation was less like a group of disgruntled, anomalous civil servants and more like a kind of Fae mafia. They would make the Foundation rue the day they messed with Corgi, with a series of retaliatory strikes that group of interest like Chaos Insurgency and the Children of the Scarlet King could only dream of. It began with the kidnapping of Project Director Stevens, who'd authorized the containment project. He vanished from his apartment and was replaced with an adult European mole, which seems to be the Fae equivalent of leaving a horse's head in the bed as
an offer you can't refuse,
to send a message. But it didn't stop there. Over the next 3 weeks, 17 different members of personnel, specifically construction workers, who'd worked on the project woke up to find the walls of their houses had been entirely replaced by poison ivy and deathcap mushrooms. And after 2 months, researcher Mills, the weird dog torturer we told you about earlier, woke up with a highly poisonous nightshade berries in his mouth and hawthorn stakes driven through his hands and feet, crucifixion style. All perpetrated by some very upset 3-inch transport workers. At this point, the Foundation put together who was behind these attacks and decided to try to make amends with the Fae whom they'd understandably upset with their treatment of Corgi. A plan was drafted to have all the SCP-2952-1 entrances unburied. After this undertaking was completed, the Fae retribution came to an end, and most of the damage was undone. Director Stevens was returned unharmed. The construction workers got their walls back. And, well, researcher Mills didn't get better, but I think we can all agree that animal cruelty isn't really a crime that we should be forgiving lightly. After all this chaos had transpired and the SCP Foundation had fully made amends, Director Stevens had a note left on his desk by a starling, which then flew off before it could be caught. By the way, can we just take a second to appreciate that the SCP Foundation has contained literal demigods and interdimensional horrors, but Director Stevens was outfoxed by a bird? Wonderful, those Fae truly are built different. Anyway, the note on his desk, translated from Welsh, read, "Thank you for your prompt response to commuter complaints and wonderful customer service. As such, we have granted all members of your organization complimentary transportation on our Corgi system. Please send a sparrow to the Council of the City office nearest you if you have further questions. G. Foxglove, Director of Transportation, the Council of the Tylwyth Teg." And with tremendous relief that the slate had finally been cleared, the Foundation decided that they would accept the kind offer extended to them by the Council and send one of their field agents to take a look inside the Corgi system. The field agent in question was Agent Elizabeth Davies, chosen for her pleasant social skill and proficiency in Welsh. With the intention to take a ride in mind and connected to an audio and video feeds linked back to Central Command, Agent Davies touched the site of Corgi. This caused her to shrink down to a height of 3.2 centimeters, much like all the other commuters. She stepped into the SCP-2952 entrance and found that on the inside, it looked not unlike a regular train, though some carriages seemed to be in disrepair and everything was written in Welsh. Oh, and everything was made with wood and plant matter too. The chassis appeared to be constructed from birch, and all the seat cushions were made of flower petals. It was all very whimsical, honestly. Agent Davies struck up conversations with some of the other commuters. One complained about delays caused by the fact that Corgi was suffering from kidney stones, a problem that the Foundation is eager to help the poor animal get over to keep the transit system running smoothly. She also chatted with a sweet elderly lady on the train who was getting people to sign a petition to allow mice back onto the Corgi transit system. When Agent Davies departed the system, she patted the dog and told him he was a good boy, before returning to normal size. Since January 5, 2017, the Corgi system and its passengers have become invisible to everyone who wasn't officially under SCP Foundation employ. This has allowed it for its reclassification as a safe anomaly. So there you have it, folks. At least one of our two very long boys got everything sorted out. We love occasionally doing a happy ending here at SCP Explained. Remember to stay tuned for our next episode about the time that SCP-106 managed to get onto a school bus. What? We did say occasionally.
Josie is a half cat. No, she isn't half cat, half something else. And she's not a humanoid with feline features either. She is literally half of a cat. Actually, to be more precise, she is the front half, but an otherwise ordinary black and gray tabby cat. That is ordinary apart from having no visible back legs or hindquarters. You might think that'd make it hard for Josie to get around, but if you asked her on how only being a half cat affects her on a daily basis, well, she wouldn't be able to answer you due to the simple fact that cats generally can't speak. But nevertheless, Josie will happily and effortlessly walk around on her own two legs, moving as if she had a second pair of hind legs in place behind her. Her back half isn't invisible, it's as if it's not even there at all, not showing up on x-rays, and yet it can give a slight yield when touched, being almost tangible but not fully. Despite this, Josie suffers no adverse health problems or any other complications despite lacking one half of her body. Occasionally, she doesn't mind having her semi-corporeal hindquarters stroked, although she will usually get a little bit scratchy if people try that. So how does the SCP Foundation keep an anomaly like Josie contained? Well, it turns out that they don't really need to. She's perfectly harmless and is actually allowed to roam freely around the lower levels of the facility she's kept at. Casually as you like, she slinks around the corridors, passing from one room to the next. Of course, if cats could talk, then Josie would probably tell you that she has the run of the whole facility. The only real question left is, what does a half-cat do when she's left to wander around a Foundation facility completely unsupervised? Easy. She starts looking for a ball of yarn. Josie was sure she'd seen one somewhere around here. One of the researchers had carried it off for testing not too long ago. Her small front paws patted against the ground as Josie navigated her way to where she last remembered seeing that coveted ball of yarn being taken. She passed a group of researchers, one of them kneeling down to give her a friendly scratch behind the ears. Just as she closed her eyes and purred at the greeting, a sound coming from down the hall startled her. It was a low, distressed sobbing. Having never been taught that old saying about curiosity in cats, Josie slunk past the researcher's legs towards the source of the noise. The room that the crying was coming from had no windows, no way for her to get in. Luckily, Josie, despite only having half a body, had enough determination and resourcefulness for 2 whole cats. Around the corner, she knew there was an open air vent, and sure enough, she leaped gracefully up to it with ease. The cold metal tunnel was just big enough to accommodate her little furry self as she crawled through, the echoing sound of sobs guiding her. As she reached the grate looking out into the windowless room, Josie spotted a tall, thin creature sitting with its back to her. Its arms would have been long enough to reach the ground if it had stood at its full height, but for now they were wrapped tightly around its legs as the creature rocked back and forth. Its loud wails showed that it was clearly in a great deal of distress, although Josie wouldn't be able to understand why having someone look at its face would make this slender creature so upset. Nearby, there was a giant metal cube with a hole ripped in it, and while the rest of the room was empty, there seemed to be several large red smears on the ground. How strange. She cocked her head to one side and meowed, tapping one paw against the air vent grate. It seemed pretty loose. With a few good pushes, the screws came free, and the adorable half-cat hopped down into the room. As she got closer to the creature, she noticed it had a black bag covering its face. Little did Josie know, an hour earlier a junior researcher had made the terrible mistake of putting on a pair of X-ray glasses he ordered from the back of a comic book. As it turns out, these were the only ones to ever actually work. He saw right through 096's containment cube, and all hell had broken loose. But Josie didn't mind. She decided to endear herself to the strange, shy creature by rubbing up against its long leg. Returning the same affection that it had so rarely been given, it bent down and gently scooped Josie up in its spindly arms. The pair of them sat in the corner together, Josie getting herself comfortable on the tall creature's lap, purring as long fingers ran over her tabby fur. The creature, being so careful not to harm the half-cat, treated her like she was as delicate as glass. It had briefly stopped crying thanks to its visitor, and as much as she noticed the sounds of sobbing had ceased, Josie would never understand the difference she had made to SCP-096's day. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before their encounter was cut short. A legion of guards in scramble goggles burst into the room to retake control of the situation. The last thing they expected to see was 096 sitting calmly with Josie on its lap and a bag covering its face. But the sudden entrance of a security team startled the poor half-cat. Within a second, she had bolted out of the room, shooting under the legs of the guards and back out into the facility. Now that she was back outside, Josie recalled her earlier hunt for a ball of yarn to play with. She still wasn't sure where it had gotten to. Maybe someone had moved it. Pacing over to the elevator, she stared up at the heavy steel doors. The numbers above were gradually ticking down, denoting which floor the elevator had currently stopped at. Of course, Josie couldn't read, so instead she sat and meowed loudly at the elevator. Maybe if she made enough noise, the doors would eventually open. Eventually, after a few short minutes of waiting and growling, the doors slid apart. Another gaggle of researchers passed her by, and Josie plodded into the elevator, spotting a familiar face. One of the researchers, a doctor by the name of Sophie Cartwright, was still inside, and smiled down at the half-cat explorer. Dr. Cartwright had come across Josie a few times, enough for the intrepid little tabby to consider them friends. "Where to, Josie?" Dr. Cartwright asked, her hand hovering over the elevator's buttons. As if in reply, Josie looked up and meowed. Humans always seemed to smile if she meowed after they'd said something to her. Sophie chuckled and pushed the door close button. "Hold the elevator," another much gravelier voice called. A hand, or rather a paw, reached out and caught the doors before they could slide closed. It was another of the Foundation's doctors, one with both a considerable reputation and a very distinguishing look, to say the least. Dr. Kane Pathos Crow stepped inside the elevator and pushed one of the buttons. Sophie had to force herself to keep her head down, but couldn't help herself from stealing the occasional glance up at Dr. Crow. She heard the rumors about a peculiar anomalous event changing his appearance, but had never seen him up close before. Josie, on the other hand, couldn't take her eyes off Crow, staring up at him, frozen to the spot, and letting out a low, cautious whine. If her tail was visible, Sophie would have seen it swaying from side to side, as the brave little half-cat kept her defensive ground, standing between her friend Dr. Cartwright and her mortal enemy. You see, Dr. Crow was a dog, or at least a man who had been turned into something very much like a dog. Still capable of speech, but with a distinctively canine body. Crow kept to himself the entire ride down, although Sophie could feel the tension between the dog-bodied doctor and her little half-cat friend. Out of the corner of his eye, Dr. Crow spotted Josie trying his best to ignore her. He let out a low, discomforted growl, the kind a dog makes when they're on edge. To his credit, he couldn't really help it. The man had been turned into a canine after all. But it took all his stoicism to suppress a bark and to stop himself from chasing Josie around the cramped elevator. Arriving at her floor, Sophie stepped down, followed by little Josie, who moved as far away from Crow as quickly as she could. The doors closed once more and sent him further down into the depths of the facility. As she turned to look, Sophie noticed Josie had craned her head up to check on her. "Aw, were you protecting me, Josie?" she asked with a smile, bending down to thank the half-cat with a scratch behind the ears. Before she could stay for too long, Josie and her human companion parted, each heading down separate winding corridors. There was a funny smell hanging in the air, like something gradually melting and bubbling, only to reform and melt again, filling the half-cat's pink nose with a strange burning scent. As she passed a holding cell, something broke Josie's concentration yet again, the noise of a hand tapping at glass. She turned and instantly meowed a greeting to the second familiar face of the day, albeit a more beaked face. Kneeling down on the other side of the glass, the black-robed plague doctor waved politely at the dual-pawed passerby. Sitting in front of the glass, hoping to be let in, Josie gave another meow. "I'm quite well," the doctor mused. "And how are you, my dear?" he asked politely. Josie got up on her back legs. Or rather, that's what it would have looked like if she had hindquarters. Instead, it looked like she was almost floating in place from halfway down, stretching her front paws up, reaching towards the bird-like face as the masked doctor playfully tapped his fingers against the glass to amuse his feline friend. "No, I cannot let you in, I'm afraid," he sighed, sounding a touch more melancholic. Not that a half-cat can understand the difference in someone's cadence. "Not all of us here are gifted the freedom you enjoy, my furry friend. Freedom is not something this organization would ever understand. No matter how much they claim to know us, the fact of the matter is they never really listen." From the other side of the glass, Josie blinked and cocked her head to one side, confused. She'd barely heard a word he said. "Oh, but listen to me, go on," the plague doctor chuckled, wrapping his fingers in front of the half-cat again. "I suppose you'll be looking for that ball of yarn they took for testing. I saw them carrying the box. It was in that way." He pointed, and Josie's little green cat eyes followed the direction of his finger. Barely able to comprehend what had been said to her, she simply meowed up in thanks and plodded the way she'd been directed. "Farewell, little Josie," SCP-049 said quietly from inside its cell, watching the half-cat until she had disappeared from view. As she continued through the lower levels of the facility, Josie slipped through doors seconds before they closed, leapt up onto tables and dashed between legs. That strange smell was back, having caught her attention and distracted her from her quest again. Tracking it to its source, Josie suddenly felt uneasy. She entered a room with a huge vat of acid, the source of the burning scent she'd picked up on. Though it was what was inside the vat, trapped in a loop of regenerating itself only to be melted over and over again by the acid, that got her feeling defensive. The vast reptilian monstrosity sensed a small life form outside its tank and opened one yellow eye, squinting through the searing, burning acid at the tiny little creature staring up at it. The reptile snarled, screwing its now healed eyes shut and swiping what was left of its limbs at the glass. Rearing back, Josie gave the monster her fiercest hiss, baring her fangs at it. The beast usually abhorred other beings, finding all other forms of life unnatural, unforgivable, and so detestable that it would normally stop at nothing to eradicate them. But today, a tiny tabby cat with her entire back half missing was standing up to the crocodilian nightmare, and it barely had enough will to retaliate. Maybe it was just too lethargic, too tired to try anything today. Perhaps it didn't think she was worth the effort, or figured it would see to her, along with the researchers and guards, next time it broke free from containment and went on yet another killing spree. But in Josie's mind, this facility was her home, and the brave little half-cat had scared SCP-682 into staying put. As she trotted away again, she knew that the monstrous reptile would have to think twice before messing with her. Back on track at last, Josie rounded the corner and arrived in a familiar-looking corridor. She was certain this was where she'd seen a researcher carrying the box containing the string that she coveted. Sure enough, she could see into the room where the box had been left, noticing a group of researchers and a human in an orange jumpsuit were gathered around it. A few were making notes on their clipboards at a safe distance, while the one in orange stepped closer to the box. Josie watched as a single bee flew out of the box. Her feline eyes followed it, ready to pounce if it came close enough. The man wearing the jumpsuit was waving his arms, trying to swat the insect away. A moment later, he grabbed his arm in pain. The bee had gotten agitated, stinging him and flying away, somehow surviving. As she waited, Josie's patience was rewarded. The researchers and the man wearing orange bustled their way out of the room, offering her the chance she needed to zip between them and get one step closer to her prize. The room was entirely empty, save for the box in the center, sitting precariously atop a table. Wiggling herself as she readied her invisible and intangible back legs, Josie shot up, just missing the table's edge. She clawed and scratched at the surface, trying to pull herself up, but her lack of hindquarters made it impossible to climb the rest of the way. Dropping back to the floor, she looked up at the table and gave it a loud, indignant meow. Changing tactics, she started to hop up on one of the table legs, digging her claws into the woodwork to hoist herself up bit by bit. Sure enough, her new strategy worked a treat, and Josie was presented with what she had been searching for. One final hurdle was left, however. The box was closed. Now the struggles of only being a half-cat are one thing, but not having opposable thumbs is a difficulty that has plagued all cats since the dawn of time. But not being able to grab or hold things with the ease of a human, there's one thing that cats are great at, and that's pushing things over. Nudging the box to the table's edge with a gentle boop of her nose, Josie eventually tipped the whole thing off, causing it to land on its side on the floor, the lid falling open. Triumphantly, she jumped back down to claim her prize, expecting to find the ball of yarn and spend the next few hours playing with it. But something was wrong. The yarn had changed, and now it was looking at her. The ball had started as yarn and ribbon, the perfect plaything for any half-cat or full cat for that matter. But the Foundation had been running their usual invasive tests on it, and since cutting a portion of the string off, it had transformed. It was now a ball of meat, functioning, blinking eyes staring out of a mass of overlapping sinew and blood-red matter. The multiple eyes looked up at the half-cat that had knocked it to the floor and asked a single question in a deep voice emanating from somewhere within its lipless form. "Are you Eric?" Completely unfazed by this, Josie whacked the ball with her paw and watched as it rolled halfway across the room. Tentacle segments of its body gradually pulled the amorphous mass back to where it started, and then asked once again, "Are you Eric?" Once again, Josie slapped the ball and watched it roll away from her, both completely unaware of who Eric was and a little perturbed that someone had replaced the ball of yarn with such an inadequate toy. Turning her back on SCP-066, Josie the half-cat searched for a way out of the room and went back to prowling around the facility for something to entertain herself. She noticed that she was starting to get hungry. Maybe if she got lucky, one of the researchers would sneak her a piece of cheese.
What's the largest animal you can think of? Okay, that's probably too vague of a question. Your mind probably went straight to the oceans, picturing deep-sea leviathans like the mighty blue whale. Let's go a little bit closer, shall we? What about on land? What are the biggest animals that live up here with us above the water? Elephants, maybe? What about rhinos? Then again, hippos are up there too, in the same kind of ballpark, all pretty huge. What about cows? They can grow pretty big, right? Especially with all the crazy growth hormones that meat manufacturers pump into them these days. Well, what if there was something out there bigger than all of those? Imagine it. Some huge beast roaming the wilderness that easily towered above any creature you've ever seen in your life. This thing would be massive, striding across the world, towering above the meager height of a human being. Now, imagine that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just big, but kept getting bigger. Sure, all of this might sound like the premise for the next Godzilla or Cloverfield movie, but while Big Charlie might not be the king of the monsters, it certainly lives up to that first part of its nickname. Of course, the SCP Foundation calls it SCP-4158. Big Charlie is just the playful nickname that the owners gave it, although none of them are sure who was the first to call the creature by that name. standing on 4 long legs at 3.4 meters tall when the Foundation first discovered it. SCP-4158 was about 1 3/5 times as tall as famous professional basketball player Shaquille O'Neal. But since then, well, like we said, Big Charlie is getting bigger day by day. The creature appears to be tangentially related to the bovine family of mammals, essentially making it a ginormous cow. However, SCP-4158 lacks the facial structure and features that you might expect to see on the faces at your local farm. The creature has thin, translucent skin, which is so fragile that it often tears easily, and anyone observing SCP-4158 can often see the bones and internal organs within. Ugh, gross. It possesses a large bulbous head with a protrusion at the front almost like a beak. As well as that, its huge eyes are foggy, a milky white color which seems to suggest that SCP-4158 is, at least, partially blind. The large cattle-like mammal is incredibly skinny, almost to the point where its bones stick out from underneath its skin. Its legs are longer than the rest of its colossal body and seem barely able to support the animal's weight. On description alone, you can't help but feel sorry for the poor creature and its sorry state of living. Normally, Big Charlie is mostly calm and docile, barely acknowledging the Foundation personnel that come to examine it, feed it, or clean its containment cell. Held in a heavy containment zone, SCP-4158 is fed through a 5-meter trough on the far east wall of its cell, surviving on a diet of raw beef, hay, wood, and bricks. Not the typical grass-only eating habits you'd expect from normal cows. But according to the Foundation's extensive testing on the creature, its diet doesn't seem to be what is causing SCP-4158 to keep growing at the rate it has been. The mass of Big Charlie is in some sort of state of perpetual increase, meaning its size and weight are always growing. And it is because of this continuous growth that every week the Foundation is forced to shear off great swaths of excess meat from the creature, cleaving off its flesh and incinerating the mass, all while Big Charlie is still alive. Now, before you start dialing PETA's hotline, it's also worth mentioning Big Charlie can't feel pain. What's more, testing has revealed that the meat taken from SCP-4158 is USDA utility-grade beef, the kind that would normally come from older cattle. Utility-grade meat has no fat marbling, so it isn't as tender or as flavorsome as other more premium grades, but would normally be used in canned and processed food products. And despite the Foundation destroying the excess that they cut off of Big Charlie as a precaution, in theory the meat is still good to eat and possesses no anomalous properties. Then again, would you really want to eat a burger made from SCP-4158? I didn't think so. If left unchecked and allowed to grow for longer than a week, SCP-4158 will begin to form new features, limbs, organs, and sometimes even genitals will sprout from random places all over its body. The previous record for Big Charlie's most substantial growth was when he increased to 8.5 meters tall. That's over 3/5 the height of the Hollywood sign and over 1.5 times the average height of a giraffe. At this immense size, Charlie has developed 7 legs, 4 stomachs, 3 tongues, and numerous other extremities before the SCP Foundation cut him back down to size. And we mean they literally cut him back down. So what exactly is this thing? It's like a giant cow, but not actually a cow, even though its flesh is identical to beef. And it's not a destructive, rampaging monster either, showing no hostility towards humans, even when they are shearing its excessive body mass away. Could it be some kind of failed genetic experiment? An attempt to solve hunger by engineering a creature that could not only stay alive, but keep growing after having its meat cut away? If that were true, it would make SCP-4158 a literal cash cow for the meat industry. Well, we've got kind of a funny story about that, actually. Big Charlie was first encountered by the Foundation back in December 2004 in Crewdson, Indiana. A number of calls had been made to the area's local animal control services, with reports of a large cow with mange roaming the nearby Highway 17. 2 officers belonging to the Animal Control Department were sent out to investigate these reports, and what they found was SCP-4158, wandering aimlessly, but unlike any cow they had ever seen. The officers called local police, where a Foundation plant caught wind of what they had found and called in containment specialists. The case was closed after the animal control officers were given amnestics, and a cover story was put in place about a cow with mange that was put down where it had been found. In reality, the SCP Foundation rounded up old Big Charlie and transported it to safety with little resistance from the animal. They were able to trace the creature's origin back to somewhere called Butcher's Block, a nearby slaughterhouse. The manager of the establishment, one Jeff Fine, and a single employee named Barney Mossman were brought in by the Foundation for questioning. Another employee, Rory Gildson, was also retrieved from his home after having called in sick to work that day. Barney Mossman, the first of the Butcher's Block employees to be interviewed, stated that SCP-4158 had been called Big Charlie since long before he had started his job at the slaughterhouse. According to his testimony, he knew nothing about where the creature had actually come from, only that it was fed hay but would also occasionally eat anything else it could, including other cows. Since joining Butcher's Block 4 years earlier, Mossman had been told not to ask questions or to tell anyone else about SCP-4158. The morning after the huge creature had seemingly escaped, Mr. Fine had apparently angrily accused both Barney and Rory of selling him out and giving Big Charlie away to the competitors of Butcher's Block, even though they were the only slaughterhouse in the area. But Mossman was convinced that neither of them were capable of doing something like that. Rory apparently treated Big Charlie like his own child, and Fine had an even stranger relationship with the creature. Rory Gildson, the other of Fine's employees, was more helpful in shedding light on SCP-4158's origin than Barney had been. Rory explained that he and Jeff Fine had bought a pregnant cow from an unknown person 9 years earlier, considering it to be a steal, a 2 for the price of 1 bargain. However, one day without warning, the calf fell out of its mother. It wasn't born like any ordinary cow, however. According to Gildson, it had ripped through the mother cow's chest and looked disgusting. While Rory and Jeff had initially thought the calf to be dead, they discovered it had tried to get back into the barn after they hauled it outside. Their original intention had been to sell the creature off for scientific study, or failing that, to a freak show. However, after their attempts to sell the calf failed, Jeff and Rory had decided the best course of action would be to put the animal down. They had reasoned that releasing it into the wild could have negatively affected the ecosystem, so instead they took a bolt pistol and pushed it between the creature's eyes, then fired. But nothing happened. Rory tried again but ended up breaking the gun instead. They slit the animal's throat, but it barely bled. Even butchering it on the spot while it was still alive did nothing. Fine and Gildson reduced the calf to little more than a skeleton, but it simply refused to die. The pair of them packaged the meat they had removed with the rest, hoping no one would notice or ask where it had come from. It was a few days later that Rory realized SCP-4158 was capable of regrowing whatever was cut off of it. He and his boss even tried some, and couldn't tell the difference. They had their hands on a cow that would eat anything put in front of it, and that could produce infinite meat. The Foundation probed Rory Gildson further for more information on the creature, learning that SCP-4158 was sterile and incapable of reproducing, the only one of its kind. Rory argued that the Foundation legally couldn't take Big Charlie away, that the creature was still private property. Little did he realize he was wrong. But he, just like Barney Mossman, also knew nothing about how the animal had escaped in the first place. Finally, Jeff Fine, the owner of the Butcher's Block slaughterhouse, was questioned by the Foundation. He repeated Rory's earlier story about the strange calf that had been born and how it could regenerate the flesh that was sheared off of it. Fine remarked that he considered it to be a blessing. When asked about his whereabouts on the night SCP-4158 had escaped from Butcher's Block, Jeff admitted that he had been praying, but not to God, to Big Charlie. He had apparently been doing this every night since realizing what the creature could do, viewing the animal as a provider and a savior. I just felt something when I was around him. I could tell that he wanted to make this sacrifice for us. Ever since he tried to get into the barn after we threw him out, I knew he cared for us, Fine told the Foundation. I would open his pen, take off my clothes so that I was pure before him, lay down and receive his blessings. And how would he receive those blessings? By drinking the animal's blood. Yeah, Jeff Fine was a real eccentric like that. One night, when Fine had entered the pen to perform this weird ritual, Big Charlie had escaped. But his owner was convinced that there must have been a reason for this, that the animal had some sort of goal. When the Foundation staff conducting Fine's interview dismissed this idea, the slaughterhouse owner became enraged.
How dare you question Big Charlie? He knows what's best for all of us. I'm done here. I don't need to keep answering questions like this. Let me out. I need to see Big Charlie. I need to see if he's safe.
The Foundation believes that Jeff Fine's practice of worshipping SCP-4158 was not due to any anomalous effect caused by the creature itself. None of the Foundation personnel tasked with feeding, studying, and shearing meat off of Big Charlie have displayed any similar behavior of performing abnormal religious rituals. He really was just a huge weirdo. As for the Butcher's Block slaughterhouse, Fine and the rest of his employees were given amnestics to forget Big Charlie had ever even existed, and the slaughterhouse was closed under the false pretense of a health code violation and its staff being arrested for malpractice. The one question that remains unanswered, however, is the identity of the individual that first sold Jeff Fine the cow that gave birth to SCP-4158. It just goes to show you, though, sometimes you don't know where your food is coming from. If you lived in Indiana in late 2004, who knows? You might have eaten some of Big Charlie and not even realized it. In an old house, an old woman gathers her knitting supplies. This is a special project for a little boy named Tommy she loves dearly. She knits furiously, and soon the mix of cotton, synthetic fiber, and cloth of every color turn from raw materials into something else. A teddy bear. She puts the finishing touches on the bear. This is a very special bear, after all, and sends the patchwork bear off to its destination with a red Get Well card. The card is labeled Kairos the Bear, and inside she writes a personal note. To Tommy, because only time can mend all wounds. Love, Grammy. But this package of love would never reach its destination. SCP-2295 was found at the site of a crashed mail truck, and it looks exactly like a standard handmade teddy bear, with one difference. On the left side of its chest, just under its jaunty tan bow, it wears a heart-shaped pin, but not a standard cartoon heart. This is a disturbingly realistic, anatomically correct pin of a heart organ. And that's because SCP-2295 has a specific purpose, and it's one that has everything to do with actual human organs. SCP-2295 spends most of its time completely inert, spending its days as just another cuddly stuffed toy. Tests performed on the toy revealed that it had no unusual properties, and seems to be a normal handmade keepsake. That is, until someone is injured in its presence. Not any injury will do. A paper cut or even a broken arm, for example, won't do much to activate its anomalous properties. But if it detects a critical injury to a human organ nearby, it will trigger a secret power. One that the Foundation is still trying to figure out how it works. Because SCP-2295 is a miracle worker. When it senses the presence of someone with a serious injury to an organ and is within 2 meters of them, SCP-2295 springs into action. Suddenly, from unknown sources, the bear will produce objects including scissors, white thread, and sewing needles or a crocheting hook from its mouth. If there are any crafting supplies on hand, it will incorporate those as well. And then it gets to work. Despite only having hands made of fabric and stuffing with no fingers, the anomalous bear is still able to craft what will end up being a patchwork recreation of the damaged human's organ. Cute, if a little creepy, but that's just the beginning. The injured person mysteriously falls unconscious, and the patchwork organ, which the Foundation has designated as SCP-2295-1 instance, will disappear. The SCP-2295-1 instance will then physically replace the damaged organ inside the person's body. It's unknown how this happens. The patchwork organ will simply appear inside of their body, taking the place of the original lung or kidney, or whichever organ was failing. It's unknown where the original organ goes to, since it seems to just disappear as soon as the 2295-1 instance takes its place. Surprisingly, having this new cotton-stuffed heart or liver does not seem to cause any harm, and in fact it works exactly like the real thing. There are never any of the usual issues that come with a transplant, like the risk of it being rejected by the body, as the organic tissue seems to have no issue connecting with the organ, and treating it like it was there all along. In all instances of SCP-2295 performing this adorable but rudimentary surgery, the subjects have made a full and complete recovery. SCP-2295 might sound like a miracle worker,
but that isn't to say that its abilities aren't without their own set of complications. When faced with two injured subjects, SCP-2295 seems to always gravitate towards fixing the younger subject up first, maybe owing to its creation by a grandmother who wanted to heal whatever was ailing her grandson. No one knows who Tommy was or exactly what disease or injury he was recovering from, but his grandmother clearly felt it was serious enough to create this special bear for him. While SCP-2295 will heal anyone, it seems to be primarily a guardian for the young, and it takes its duties very seriously, even to the point of self-sacrifice. While SCP-2295 is able to pull some of its supplies out of thin air, it still always needs some raw materials to craft the new organ, including fabric and stuffing. And if there are none available, SCP-2295 will obtain them the hard way. The Patchwork Bear will sacrifice its own body, tearing itself open and removing any fabric or stuffing it needs without any concern for its own well-being. In order to craft a new organ for its patient, it slowly regenerates its own stuffing, at the rate of around a gram of stuffing per day, but it needs to harvest fabric to repair its outer layer, which the Foundation happily makes available to it, offering it a variety of patterns and types. It's no surprise that a teddy bear capable of healing mortal wounds would be of great interest to the SCP Foundation, and as soon as it was recovered from the crashed mail truck, they immediately began tests to find out more about it. Could it heal literally any organ? Were there any limits to its abilities? There was only one way to find out, and the Foundation had the perfect test subjects, D-Class personnel, whose interactions with non-cuddly teddy bear SCPs frequently left them with critical external and internal injuries. The first test subject brought in, D-2353, a 38-year-old man who was in poor health not due to his work as a D-Class personnel, but from his years and years of heavy smoking. His lungs were seriously damaged, which gave him trouble breathing and made any serious physical exertion extremely difficult. He wasn't critically injured or in danger of dying immediately, but that didn't matter to SCP-2295. D-2353 quickly passed out, and the bear sprang into action. It proceeded to take two textile swatches, one black and one red, and create a pair of fabric lungs which it installed in the patient. When he awoke, D-2353 found he had full healthy lung function again, as if he never picked up his deadly habit. But now the Foundation researchers needed to know how SCP-2295 would do with even more complicated ailments. D-3542 was 50 years old and his heart was not in good shape. Not only did he have a serious case of atherosclerosis, which is a disease where cholesterol plaque builds up and blocks blood flow and can put you at serious risk of a heart attack, but he also had an irregular heartbeat. This D-Class was in bad shape, but that was no problem for SCP-2295, who took a collection of different colors of yarn and a crochet hook and created a plushy heart. Just like the lungs had acted as if they were completely regular organs, after the heart anomalously ended up inside the man's chest, it began to beat normally and performed all the complicated functions of a human heart. But there was one detail that shocked the onlooking doctors. Before the yarn organ had vanished, the doctors had seen that it was beating. So is there any organ that SCP-2295 can't replace? That was about to be tested when D-7894 was brought in. A 24-year-old woman, she had suffered serious burns all over her torso, left abdomen, and right leg. She was brought in and sedated to numb the agonizing pain, and researchers were worried that they had come up against the limit of SCP-2295's abilities, since the skin is the largest organ after all. But SCP-2295 wasn't fazed at all. The bear immediately started sewing segments of patchwork fabric and layering them onto the damaged skin, replacing the dermis and epidermis layer by layer. Unlike the other cases, these replacement organs are visible, and D-7894 now has patchwork skin, just like her talented surgeon. And amazingly, the fabric has the same sense of touch that her regular skin did. The final test of SCP-2295's abilities came with D-2723, who was only 18 years old. This last-minute D-Class test was performed because he was showing signs of severe cerebral hemorrhage, the kind that would cause brain damage in only minutes, and would be followed soon after by complete brain death. SCP-2295 sprung to life, but as soon as it examined the test subject, it became distressed. It started frantically grasping at random material around it, as if it didn't know what to do with them. Then it reached inside itself and provided a large chocolate bar, which it offered to the subject, sadly to no effect. It then seemed to admit defeat as it grabbed tightly onto the subject's leg. Observers reported that it was leaking a tear-like solution from its small knitted eyes as it embraced the dying D-Class in his final moments. Sadly, it seems that the human brain is the one mystery that even SCP-2295 can't solve. SCP-2295 appears to pose no threat to anyone and was classified as safe after testing. It is inactive when not in the presence of an injured person, and has never displayed hostile instincts when active. The Foundation determined that it should be stored in a standard containment locker in Site-37, where it can be kept safely until it's needed for tests or to repair an injured SCP personnel. Access is limited to those with Level 3 or higher security clearance, and any contact with the bearer is highly regulated. But there is one element of SCP-2295's existence that continues to worry Foundation staff. SCP-2295's full origins and the grandmother who crafted it are unknown. The note it was found with is the only clue as to where it may have come from, but there are plenty within the Foundation who are suspicious of the veracity of this letter, and they have good reason not to be too trusting. Because another bear with similar abilities exists, and it is distinctly less benevolent than SCP-2295. SCP-1048 is also a teddy bear, but it is capable of moving on its own and communicating through gestures at all times. It was initially allowed to wander around independently, and seemed to make its home at Site-24 a happier place, but then it began to display its own crafting abilities. SCP-1048 is able to craft duplicates of itself, and while the original was seemingly harmless, the ones it made were not. These similarly shaped bears were made of disturbing materials and were extremely hostile towards any humans they encountered. The first, SCP-1048-A, was made entirely out of human ears, and when it shrieked, it caused anyone nearby to generate ear-like growths all over their bodies, eventually causing them to suffocate. The creature disappeared, and an on-site researcher was found to be missing an ear. The creations of SCP-1048 only got stranger and deadlier from there. SCP-1048-B was found in the site's cafeteria, where it was moving around in a halted, jerky fashion. It then started bursting at the seams and revealed what appeared to be a human fetus inside. When the creature screamed, it sounded like a much louder version of a human infant, and its crows caused massive internal damage to anyone around it. SCP-1048-B was killed in the ensuing conflict with Foundation agents, ending its threat. But SCP-1048 was learning deadlier techniques. When SCP-1048-C was discovered, it looked to be a teddy bear made entirely out of rusty scrap metal. When it was spotted by Dr. Carver and targeted by Foundation personnel, the creature turned violent and proved to have incredible strength, jumping through the agents who were trying to neutralize it, tearing through their bodies like tissue paper. Attempts to damage it were unsuccessful, and both it and the bear made out of ears are still on the loose along with the original SCP-1048. Capturing it is major priority for the Foundation, because no one wants to see what it will create next. Is there a connection between these two very different teddy bears? No one has been able to answer this question. The origins of SCP-1048 are unknown, and so is any connection to the mysterious grandmother who may have made Kairos the bear, but their abilities are similar, with both able to craft living objects out of seemingly any material. They just have very different ideas as to what a good use of their crafting abilities are. It is fortunate that an anomaly as potentially powerful as SCP-2295 seems to only want one thing: to help those in need, especially those who are the most vulnerable. Obviously, it helps to be an animal lover when you start working at a shelter. It's not exactly a requirement of the job, but it definitely makes it a little more palatable when you occasionally have to deal with a critter that's more nasty than usual. Having an already built-in compassion towards animals makes it easier to forgive them for not doing what you want. From a very young age, Harper always liked to think of animals as people, They just didn't think or communicate the same way as humans. Even the best trained pets in the world don't really know the actual meaning of certain words. They're just taught how to respond to specific commands in certain ways. But that doesn't mean they couldn't also have distinct personalities of their own, just like humans do. And then, of course, there were all the wild animals that had never been trained or domesticated. Harper always felt a little sorry for any baby bird with its wing broken, or any badgers or possum that arrived at the shelter after getting hit by a car. They didn't live around humans and had probably never even experienced being indoors before, let alone having people nursing them back to health. To empathize, Harper used to imagine how terrified she would be if she was hurt, if she'd broken her leg or arm or worse, only for something much larger than her to take her into a structure she'd never been in before. And on top of that, having no way of understanding that this giant was trying to help her heal, as well as being separated from her friends, family, and everyone she knew. The way she saw it, this was what it must have been like for the majority of animals that were brought into the shelter where she worked, and she wanted to do her best to help calm her little furry or feathered patients. "You gotta fortify your heart in this job, Harp," her friends who worked with her at the shelter would say, and it was true to an extent. They didn't mean she'd have to become cold and heartless. That would be an overcorrection. But it was their and Harper's responsibility to administer the appropriate medical care and provide a temporary sanctuary to these lost, wounded, or abandoned animals. What Harper had to remember was that none of them were her own pets. Often a lot of the critters that were brought into the shelter were already someone else's companion and might have just got lost while out on a walk. And while some others were given up by their previous owners who had cruelly shrugged off the responsibility of caring for them, those animals were in need of new homes and couldn't stay cooped up in the shelter forever. Not everyone that gave up their pet did it callously though. Sometimes they might have found themselves falling on hard times and being unable to financially look after an animal. Others might have owned a pet that had a behavioral problem, like being too aggressive, and even though the person still loved them dearly, they might have just not been able to make it work. In times like that, they'd have no choice but to take their animal to the shelter. Just outside the side entrance was an area where people could drop off their animals and quickly buzz to the staff inside, just in case they wanted to avoid a protracted emotional farewell to their four-legged or winged companion. The buzzer had sounded, just as Harper had been coming off her lunch break. It was her turn this shift to quickly go and collect any animal that had been left out there. Even though their owners usually left them in their cage or with their lead tied to a nearby street lamp, Harper knew she had to rush to the side door, just in case somebody else tried to rush in and steal the poor, abandoned pet. After turning them in the lock, she hooked her keys back on the belt clip she wore and pushed the side door open. Harper had been fully expecting to see the usual, a leashed dog or cat coming over to investigate her, confused as to where their former owner had gone. This time though, there was just a box standing outside. It wasn't huge, in fact. It was almost entirely empty. Almost. Picking it up carefully, in case there were baby birds or a nest of unhatched eggs inside, Harper opened the cardboard flap to reveal a rock. Sitting in the box was a single, solitary rock, an oval of smooth granite with a paper note next to it. Reaching in, she retrieved and unfolded the scrap. "Please care for my pet rock," was written on one side, in a messy, uncoordinated scrawl. Immediately assuming that this whole thing was some kid's idea of a joke, Harper tipped the rock out onto the ground and threw the box in the trash. She had more important things to focus on. Within the next hour alone, people brought in a concussed parakeet, a bat infected with rabies, and a squirrel that had survived being run over by a moped into the shelter. Work had been so busy that by the time her shift had ended, Harper had barely thought about the pet rock prank. That is, until she was getting ready to leave. She headed through the side door, mainly so that she could do a final check in case any animals had been left there and someone had forgotten to hit the buzzer. There was nothing there, and Harper hooked her bag over her shoulder, shutting the door behind her. Something the size and weight of a baseball knocked against her foot, causing her to look down and see the rock, the same one from earlier, only now it had flipped over, probably after she had tipped it out of its box. On the side facing up at her, the rock had a shiny metal zipper fastened shut. Curious, Harper picked it up to take a closer look. It didn't seem like the zip had just been glued onto the stone's surface. It was embedded in it, actually part of the rock itself. And there was something sad about it. Sure, it was just a rock, an inanimate lump of stone, but for whatever reason, a feeling of pity crept up on Harper, causing her to slip the rock into her bag as she headed for the parking lot. It was starting to get dark by the time she got home. Heading up to her room and flipping on her lamp, Harper placed the zipped-up stone under its light and took another long look at it. Although she'd first thought it was purely a joke, now she couldn't tell if it was some elaborate art piece or a quirky garden ornament. The thing was solid stone all the way through. Surely the zipper was just for show. There couldn't possibly be anything beneath it. To her surprise, the metal fastener began to part as Harper dragged on the puller and slider down from the top stop towards the bottom one. It was relatively easy. Not even some of her own clothes unzipped as smoothly as this rock. As soon as the slider connected with the bottom stop, the teeth of the top and bottom edges parted, revealing more teeth below. Except these almost looked like human teeth. They opened up to reveal a mouth, a part of the rock just like the zipper, which took the place of its lips. The moment the mouth opened, it let out a tiny sound, like it was breathing, which startled Harper. With a yelp, she dropped the rock from her hands, and it even made a tiny grunt as it fell to the floor. It was alive. Seeing it hit her bedroom carpet, Harper stared utterly bewildered at the rock. Its toothy mouth almost looked sad, like it had curved into a frown. Then she heard the sound it was making. Perhaps it was her years working with animals at the shelter, and her long-held sympathy for them that had given her a sort of protective instinct for all living things. Or maybe it was just the bizarreness of the situation, of having a rock with a mouth whimpering in pain on the floor in front of her. Either way, Harper felt compelled to pick the lump of stone back up and place it gently on the desk. Its mouth seemed to smile a bit more as she did. While it seemed creepy at first, the compulsion to take care of this helpless little rock only got stronger. Grabbing a pipette and pouring a glass of water from the faucet, Harper started to squeeze out droplets of water into the rock's mouth. She had no idea how it was able to drink, but that didn't seem at all important or relevant in order for her to care for it. After all, every time a parrot or duck or crow was brought into the station, the procedure was similar. Harper would have to pipette them water or medicine. It didn't matter how they drank it just because they had beaks. It was the same with baby animals, puppies and kittens especially, who might need bottle feeding if they were only a few weeks old. As much as she was starting from scratch and would normally be completely baffled as to the best ways she could care for the rock, right now Harper was pulling on her experience at the shelter to nurse it back to health. If she was, in fact, using her instincts and not being influenced somehow. Over the next few days, Harper looked after her newfound patient as if it had been her lifelong pet. As to why she was taking such care of a rock or even what she would eventually do with it, Harper didn't really have much of a clue. But the answer to those questions didn't feel as important as looking after the rock. She'd leave for work in the morning, only to count down the hours through her shift until she got to go home and tend to the smiling stone. Throughout the course of her working day, she would pocket supplies to help her take better care of her new pet. Everything from medicine in case it got sick or picked up an infection of some kind, to bandages and other materials she could use as bedding. Grabbing a fresh, clean plastic container for it instead of another cardboard box, Harper was gradually fashioning a nest for the toothy pebble. And for the most part, it seemed to be working. Some deep-seated feeling told her that her efforts to look after the rock was gradually making it feel better every day. And then, it started talking. It wasn't exactly articulate or eloquent. It didn't even seem to know that many words, other than the two it was weakly repeating when she came home from work one day. Need, eat. It rasped a hoarse whisper passing through its unzipped lips. Rushing over to it, barely questioning it, Harper tried filling up her pipette and giving it more water. The rock spat it back out before speaking again. No, drink, only eat. What do I need to feed you? She asked, only again not questioning the absurdity of talking to a rock. Maybe after this point, after getting over the fact it had a mouth, it wasn't much of a shock that the stone also had a voice. Or could her compelling need to care for it make her oblivious to the strangeness of this situation? Of course, this wasn't a situation that many people had also found themselves in. This meant that even a quick cursory internet search for "what do pet rocks eat?" didn't yield many useful results. Only a few joke articles and nothing that actually gave Harper an answer she could act on. All the while, her rock was still croaking out the same 2 words, repeating them on a loop, its little voice getting more and more forceful each time. Need, eat, need, eat. Low on options, Harper left some bread crusts in the rock's nest, hoping that would be enough to at least satiate the rock's obvious hunger. It paused, either smelling or sensing that it had been offered something to eat. Feed. It rasped before opening its mouth wide with a tiny expectant "ah." Picking up the crusts one by one, Harper broke little pieces off and fed each bit to her rock. She sighed as a sense of overwhelming relief came flooding over her, glad that she'd found a way to feed the mouthy little mineral. If only it had worked for longer. Only a few hours later, Harper was met with more scraping demands from her pet rock, the insistent sound waking her up in the middle of the night. But this time, as she offered it more bread scraps, it refused to eat them. It was still the early hours of the morning by the time that Harper had gotten through offering the rock every different type of food in her kitchen, eventually giving up through sheer exhaustion. She folded her pillow over her ears, trying to drown out the constant cries of "need, eat." But it didn't do enough to allow her to get to sleep. At any rate, the feeling that she had to care for this talking rock was keeping her awake as much as the noise. Staring across the room, purposely facing away from her pet rock, Harper's eyes fell over her work uniform. The logo of the animal shelter stitched on it was just about visible as the gentle glow of street lamps bled through the curtains. And seeing it along with her keys clipped onto her belt that lay on the floor gave her an idea that might work. Desperation and the need to sleep getting the better of her, Harper climbed in the car, having put a jacket and jeans over her pajamas. The streets were all empty at this hour, almost pitch dark and deathly silent, but it made driving from her home to her workplace a lot faster than usual. All the while, the rock's voice was getting more and more demanding from its container that she had strapped to the front passenger seat. Sneaking up to the side door, Harper turned her key in the lock, pulled it open, and slipped indoors. The moment they heard the sound of the door shutting, a number of the dogs that had been resting securely in their cages woke up and started barking, the noise loudly echoing around the shelter. Even though it drowned out the rock's tiny voice, it felt as if its words were still ringing in Harper's ears, compelling her to go through with something she really didn't want to. And yet it felt like one of the only other options she had left. She decided it would have to be the squirrel. Rationalizing the choice in her head, in an unpleasant but purely calculated, logic-based way, it made the most sense. Earlier that week, the bushy-tailed woodland forager had been hit by a moped. It had barely survived given the number of its tiny bones that had been broken in the force of the impact. Finding its cage, it was still asleep, heavily sedated on the dosage of painkillers the shelter's resident vet had given it. Gently scooping it out of the cage, feeling its fur against her cupped hand, Harper looked at her pet rock, its container on the table. She remembered that it liked to be fed directly. Swallowing an urge to be sick that was rising at the back of her throat, Harper opened a drawer in the vet's office and pulled out a surgical scalpel. When her boss at the shelter heard there had been a break-in and reviewed the footage on the building's security cameras, they were shocked at what they saw. Though the angle obscured what Harper was doing, the blood left over and one missing squirrel seemed to be enough to go on. That, coupled with the fact that she had broken in after hours and the numerous supplies that had gone missing from the storage cupboard, led to Harper being dismissed. She was fired from her job at the animal shelter, forced to hand over her keys and uniform. While any other day this would have devastated her, the events seemed to wash over Harper pretty quickly. She was more relieved, no, pleased with herself, that the rock had stopped begging her to be fed. Her plan had worked, for now. It took about a week for her pet rock to start demanding food again. This time, just the sound of its voice made Harper frantic. Any ordinary human food she offered wasn't enough. It didn't want that. She already knew exactly what it wanted. The only thing she'd fed it that had sustained it. The big problem was that now she didn't have her keys. It would be near impossible for her to get into the shelter again. Yet still, the forceful command to be fed kept up, day and night. hour after hour, until Harper considered the only thing she had left to give her pet rock. Lifting it out of the warm nest she kept it in, her fingers were gripping the smooth stone tightly. Her arm was tense. In fact, both were. One of her muscles strained while she held the rock, the other in anticipation. Hovering it above her opposite arm, Harper could feel the tiny breaths of her pet against her skin, almost like it was so excited to eat again that it was panting with expectancy. She put it back down on her desk, quickly running into the bathroom. It wasn't that she had changed her mind. She couldn't. All she knew was that she had to feed her pet rock. Harper just needed to grab a cloth to put it in her mouth, clamping her jaws down on it to muffle her scream as she let the rock's teeth sink into her flesh, blood trickling down her arm. Nobody saw much of Harper afterwards. Her friends from the shelter would continuously call her cell phone, only to get no reply. She barely paid any attention to the ringing, eventually just letting her phone batteries die and not even bothering to charge it back up. It wasn't important. To her, the only thing that mattered was caring for her pet rock. In Harper's head, it needed to be kept safe and fed, and it was her job to look after it to the best of her ability. She had enough leftover medical supplies that she'd lifted from the shelter: bandages, antiseptic spray, rubbing alcohol, tranquilizers to treat her wounds. After a while, it almost stopped hurting, knowing that she was helping keep her pet rock fed. Being so emotionally attached to it made all of the pain more bearable. Even when she woke up one morning to find that her rock had rolled off her desk onto her bed, it hardly fazed her. Nor did seeing that it had gradually eaten her leg during the night, gnawing through tendons and bone as she slept, leaving her sheets still slick with blood when she awoke. Despite having lost most of her capacity for rational thought, Harper decided it would be best to plan ahead for when she was gone. She knew, through some twisted form of logic, that she wasn't going to last forever. There was only so much of her she'd be able to feed her pet rock for so long. Harper held a pen in her hand as best she could with all the fingers she was now missing. She scrawled out a note to whoever found what was left of her in messy, uncoordinated handwriting. "Please care for my pet rock." If keeping an SCP as a pet is an idea that appeals to you, but you want one that doesn't come with the added danger of eating you alive, then why not go and check out SCP-529 Josie the Half Cat? Or if you really aren't a cat person or a half-cat person, but still want to adopt your own anomaly, then we might just have the perfect list of candidates in Top 14 Friendliest SCPs.